In Silo's first season, Juliette Nichols grappled with the question, what if everything you thought you knew was a lie? This led to her being sent outside in the finale, where she learned that the truth was far more complicated than that. The piece of information she discovered, as Sheriff Holston's wife Allison and her lover George had before her, wasn't a revelation that things were safe outside, but a ruse that the powers that be used to deceive all the cleaners that came before them. It's a lot to consider, but the ticking clock tied to the air quickly running out in her suit forces Juliette to keep moving. The mystery of why they're there in the first place, and why inhabitants of the silo know so little about their history, hangs over everything. And season 2 opens with a flashback to what we'll learn is the silo next door. The sheriff's son brings him a note from engineering saying the generator will flood in 15 minutes. Based on what happens next, this was the signal they'd been waiting for, and he readies a group of what appears to be the workers from mechanical to storm IT. This leads to a violent encounter where they overrun the defenders, followed by a mysterious exchange where the sheriff asks his wife, why wouldn't he open the door? The he here is the first mystery, and he also refers to someone named Russell asking his wife if she thinks he was lying. He follows that up by saying there's one way to find out, which when we see that means going outside gives us enough information to piece together how the rebellion in this silo played out. Apparently they flooded the generator to force IT's hand, believing they would have to let them open the door in that case. We have to imagine they thought that the story of the toxic air and what they'd seen on the screens for their entire lives was the lie. And when they got outside, they'd find that beautiful, lush landscape that Allison Becker thought was waiting for her. We know how her story ended, though, and so we know their fate before they get out their flag and proudly rush to their doom on the surface. Their faded and battered banner is the visual cue that connects back to the present-day timeline. It's still there, along with their corpses, and if the season 1 finale left you questioning whether it was really the air outside that was killing the cleaners, I know a popular theory was that the poison was in the gas they sprayed on them right before they went out. Given that this large group of people who decided to test the theory by going out without suits on had what looks to be a 0% survival rate, I think we can safely say that, yeah, it's toxic outside. That means Jules' only option is to navigate the sea of corpses to head inside. She is able to make it to the inner chamber, pulling the outside door closed behind her, and after a real struggle, manages to force the inside door open. She notices her tape is coming loose. We notice the word lies painted in large letters on the cafeteria screen, and watch as she grabs 2 drink canteens before she runs down the stairs as her air starts to run out. As that's happening, she can't get her helmet off and has to smash through a visor with a crowbar. And the good news is that she can breathe in there, or at least she doesn't die right away. And she uses whatever's in those drinking bottles she found to attempt to wash away any toxins she might have brought inside on her suit. It's funny because life in the silo has been planned out, so everything in the flashback, from the furnishings to the interiors and the residents' clothing, it all looks about the same as the other silo. So beyond the decay of the bodies, it's impossible to tell how long ago that rebellion happened. But as she makes her way around this new silo, or at least new to her, this place that's slowly giving into decay, we can tell that it's almost a carbon copy of the one she just left. This seems important because it hints that both silos were designed to function the same way, and while the carnage here doesn't justify the extreme measures Bernard, IT, and Judicial have taken to try to control the population in their silo, it does give a real example of how things can go wrong. Also, this is an effective way to remind us visually about everything that happened in season 1 that led to Jules being here, because by this point in the episode she appears to be completely alone there. In a TV show, we don't have access to her thoughts, so given there isn't anyone for her to talk to, this all works really well to remind us how this character is experiencing this newfound isolation. To further illustrate this, they use flashbacks to her childhood. We watch the adjustment to life in Mechanical after losing her brother and her mother's untimely end, something that Walker reminds her was a choice that she made. This isn't just her being cruel. She's using it to emphasize how things are different in the Down Deep, an attempt to get her to focus on things she can fix so that she can contribute and make herself useful. It's kind of rich coming from someone who hasn't left their apartment in 20 years, but that's all part of the reason these two have such a strong connection. Throughout the first season, it was clear this is something Juliette clung to, and that they both tended to focus on fixing external things rather than focus on their issues. The flashbacks show why Jules is better equipped for this situation than most people would be, and the parallel is that these are both introductions to new environments that are more like completely different worlds. In both situations, she starts to find what she needs. If not friends, then people she can learn from in mechanical. If not food, then water from the irrigation system in the abandoned farm. We get a little more information about what was going on with her before she ran away to mechanical. In season 1, we saw that her father didn't know how to deal with her after her mother died, and here we find out that the other kids were in the same boat and mostly stayed away from her. Walker tells her about a dream she had when she was sick with pneumonia, where she woke up thinking that while she was asleep, everyone left. She thought that she was completely alone, and it was the most terrifying feeling she ever had, which we can imagine is exactly where Jules finds herself now. The deserted silo is extremely creepy no matter how well suited you might be for isolation. She's doing things like hoisting a dead raider, a body that was hanging there in a way that implies he was murdered during the fighting, and at times she hears noises that she thinks might be other people creeping in the shadows like you would, until she finally comes to the destroyed landing where the rebels mounted their attack in the flashback. There are lights and noises on the other side, so she attempts to cross over. First, she ties what looks like a pretty good knot in a rope and makes her way down it to try to swing to the other side. Somehow the rope comes loose, which seems odd since they made a point of showing her tying the knot. And later when she goes back to look at it, it appears that it might have been cut, but in the moment she falls straight down but doesn't die because she lands in water. This connects back to the note about flooding the generator and to her fears of water from season 1. In her memories of childhood, we're reminded of that directly when a young Shirley takes her to the area below the silo where the digging machine is. This is where she'll spend all that time with George when she gets older, and where she had that fateful argument with Holston and gave him the hard drive. Shirley tells her a story about going down there with Knox when they were kids, and being left behind after she fell asleep. When Jules asked her how she got out, she said she went really slow but eventually made it out. This is something a young Juliette can't imagine herself doing. But even though Shirley doesn't know her well at this point, she tells her, "Of course you could. What else are you going to do, die?" This is essentially the mission statement for Jules so far in the new season. And all her skills are on display as she rigs together a bridge to make another attempt to get to the other side. This is the show doing everything it's shown itself to be good at wrapped up in a single sequence. As I mentioned before, the eeriness from this silo being an exact copy of the one we spent the first season in, with its emptiness providing the tension, while the memories and flashbacks serve to establish what might be going through her head. The mini bursts of action keep you engaged, but the real hook here is realizing how well we know this character and how this experience would affect her. When she finally makes it to the other side after nearly falling into the water again, there's a delayed climax. The sounds turn out to be nothing. They're coming from a fan that looks like it's been there for a long time. After looking around, she decides to continue, finding the same bridge the rebels used to storm this area in the flashback, and just as she's about to leave, she hears Moon River playing in the distance. She follows it and comes up to a door which looks like the one to the server room we saw Bernard run to and open in the first season's finale. And if you pause this episode before she opens it, you can see that someone has written "Any survivors, please help us" on the back of it. There are bodies on the ground and graffiti everywhere, which seem to indicate that not everyone from the silo died when the sheriff led the group outside. And when she finds a much larger and honestly cooler looking locked door that she can't open, we get confirmation that there's at least one other person inside there with her. After she pulls on the handle and looks at the electronic keypad and then starts to walk away when she can't get in, someone behind the door opens the little window peephole thing and calls out to her. He was playing the music, hoping she'd find her way there, and while he says he gets why she tried to open it, you see a closed door and you wonder what's on the other side. While he understands the impulse, he makes it plain that if she tries to do that again, he'll kill her. Here, if you try to look at the writing on the wall behind her, the doors are open, so it's hard to see, but it looks like it says something to the effect of "we're going to get in sooner or later." And that's it. Peephole closed, communications terminated, and it cuts to black, bringing the episode to an end. Episode 2 mostly serves to set the stage for a season split across 2 locations. And while we check in with the usual suspects from Mechanical, Judge Meadows also emerges to be a key character who seems like she might have more going on than we originally expected. The most predictable reaction does come from Mechanical. The rank and file, the people who have no idea about the tape, assume that if she made it over the hill, it means that it's safe outside. Walker and her ex-wife Carla from Supply are the only ones who know exactly why she survived. So when the crowd starts talking about wanting to go outside too, and Knox does his best but has trouble getting them to calm down, Walker has to intervene with a fire hose, reminding them they all have important work to get back to. Knox has a sense of responsibility for everyone in the Down Deep, and when Shirley calls him out in front of the crowd, he admits that he turned in Juliette when they came looking for her. It's a hard but justifiable choice he had to make, and a reminder of how quickly lines can be drawn between the different factions inside the silo. As far as the different reactions, Shirley takes the angry route. Everyone knows they're not getting the whole truth and they want answers. And Shirley points out that they do have some power and that they could shut the silo down. In this, she's not wrong. We know that they control the generator, and shutting it down would be like the general strike to end all general strikes. Because while it might be possible to take control that way, holding it would be something different. And as Knox points out, this is something they could only do once because Judicial and the Sheriff's Department have all the guns. And there's no reason to believe they wouldn't use them if push came to shove. This makes his trip to visit his friend in the metal shop a little later stand out. He goes there saying he has 2 asks. And we hear the first one, which is that he doesn't want the shop to make any weapons if people come asking for them. They agree to that, but then it leaves us hanging on what the second ask is by cutting away before we hear what he asks for. Everyone in the lower levels feel like they've lost one of their own. As mentioned, Shirley is the angry one. She continues to get people riled up and tries to demand answers whenever she gets a chance. She goes as far as disrupting the speech and trying to expose Bernard as a liar based on what she knows about the tape. She doesn't know the whole story, but she knows something happened with it. Knox continues to try to keep things together by doing things like sending Cooper to follow Shirley and then report back, but also stepping in to protect her when the raiders try to come for her after she disrupts the speech. Walker just wants everyone to shut the fuck up and let her mourn the loss they all experienced, so she can take some time and figure out what really happened. Bernard does have her and Carla taken into custody, which makes it seem like they might end up in the mines or maybe something worse would happen for the part they played. But we realize later when they're released that it was just to keep them away from the speech. Because they know what they did, they're a little baffled with the explanation for why Jules survived that Hank passes on while he's releasing them, but that's something I'll come back to in a minute. Paul Billings has been established to be the most conflicted character in the current situation. His adherence to the pact is unquestioned. Given his own transgressions, it's the thing that he needs to believe in to make everything make sense, but he also started to develop some loyalty to Juliette by the end of last season. And he discovered the Georgia travel guide in trying to understand why she asked to go out in the first place. He hasn't filed his report about her cleaning and is suspicious of the official story. His position is unique in that he has some power as acting sheriff, but also learns that one of the first actions Bernard took after Jules walked over the hill was to institute emergency powers that give judicial control of his department. This contradicts the pact, and when he gets to question Sims about what happened just before Juliette was taken into custody, the hard drive comes up and Bernard's decision to destroy it is another red flag. Sims writes this off as something that was done for the good of the silo, which is something he believes and on some level needs to be true, and puts both characters in a very similar place with completely different motivations. This is something the show goes back to often. Everyone in the silo thinks their role is essential to keep it going. Without their contribution, it would all fall apart. But Juliette's decision not to clean and her walking away undermines their faith that everything is working as it's supposed to. The scene where a hungover Judge Meadows hears the news from her assistant and just flatly denies it could have happened illustrates this perfectly. They always say they're not going to clean, and then they do. When she's assured Jules didn't and that everyone saw it, she asks, what, did she decide not to die too? And she gets a prompt, well, actually, and finds out she walked over the hill. It hits her hard enough that she decides to stop drinking, which is the main thing we knew this character did up to this point. This surprises Bernard when he comes to see her later. He lays out his plan to give a speech and asks her to be there with him as a sign of unity. He doesn't order her to do it because he doesn't think he would have to because of what's at stake. When he confirms it had to be the tape that helped her make it over the hill, she recognizes that he's frightened. Their conversation is littered with references to a shared past, and it becomes apparent that she knows him better than anyone else. His fear isn't about mob violence, but rather the thousands of dead bodies that Juliette saw when she entered the other silo. He points out that it looks like the silo went to war with itself, and if it happened there, it could happen in their silo. When she mentions that he just needs to follow the protocols laid out in the order, which I'll circle back to in a minute, it comes out that she was once his shadow, and therefore might know as much as him. That's the reason why he would come to her when he needs help, and she's the only one that he can turn to because he's resisted taking on a new shadow after their falling out. We learn that for reasons likely related to that, she isn't interested in helping, but he also brings up a secret she's been holding on to for 25 years, something she's even kept from him. With Juliette being gone indefinitely, the judge's expanded role was my favorite new development in this episode. The actor does a great job, and having the character coming out of this booze-induced fog she's apparently been in for the past 25 years after something mysteriously happened, while also being the only other person that knows as much about how the silo works as Bernard, does give her story a lot of potential. It also makes her request for a hot air balloon so that she can fly away like the Wizard of Oz, something she knows Bernard can't deliver, a perfect way to show where things are at. In the event of a failed cleaning, prepare for war. I started this video by saying you wouldn't sympathize with Bernard, but the opening sequence of an episode that's titled Order helps you better understand why he does the things he does. We get a glimpse behind the locked door, one that's exactly the same as the one Solo was behind in the other silo, which is highlighted by a shot that's a carbon copy of the one when Juliette started to walk away and gives us an idea about what he's trying to protect. Last season we saw the area where they monitored the cameras inside the janitorial closet, but this looks even more impressive somehow. He's able to watch Juliette outside the silo next door, which makes you wonder what else he can see and what else he knows about the other silos. And he doesn't turn to the Pact for guidance, but rather a much more substantial looking volume called The Order. We only see the top part of one page, but the way it's written, or I guess the language, seems notable. It's certainly been implied that things have been carefully planned out in the silos. But looking at this, which looks so official, I don't know, I just thought that stood out. Later in the episode when he talks to the judge who has obviously also seen this as his shadow, on top of not wanting to help him, she didn't think he would need her to because there would just be a prescribed action for any problem they run into, like in the case of a failed cleaning, prepare for war. His point there is that the tape situation wasn't something they ever accounted for. And his reaction makes you think this is the first time he's run into something like that, and yeah, this has the potential to lead to a catastrophe. Imagine Sheriff Billings leading a bunch of people from Mechanical armed with whatever they can get their hands on to try to get into the vault and see what Bernard's been keeping from them for themselves. It would be a real Wizard of Oz pay no attention to that man behind the curtain moment, and after the flashback to what happened in the other silo, there has been a precedent set. With his back against the wall, he rises to the occasion. And what I liked about this was just how ludicrous the explanation he gives to the crowd is, something that Meadows points out when they talk later, but how it also makes sense when he explains how it became his plan. This also goes to point of view. We have to remember these people grew up in the silo with all the information that they know being spoon-fed to them essentially by these people. He explains that because everyone saw Juliette walk away, he can't try what he tried in the room with the monitors when everyone saw the cleaning video, where he told everyone to forget what they just saw. Instead, he gives them the story that actually Jules was an incredibly brave hero who agreed to test out IT's new experimental tape. Something that happens to be a big step forward towards them eventually being able to safely go outside, which is what they've always been trying to do, right? It's incredibly shaky. After all, it doesn't explain why she didn't clean, which you'd have to guess people will start to question. But it's good enough to buy them a couple of days, and that's a win no matter how you look at it. It's also clever though. He knows the tape issue could come back up. Now if anyone wants to tell a different story, they'll have to disprove the one he told. As I've already mentioned, Shirley does try to do this while things are playing out. She's starting to put things together herself since she knew Supply helped Walker, and that the new tape story is a lie. Otherwise, when we see people talking about what they experienced, like Hank, it seemed like he bought the story when he's passing it on to Walker and Carla, and that was after Shirley's outburst, so Bernard is probably right that they have a couple of days to figure out their next step. Meadows, who showed up at the speech after saying she wouldn't, and helped him to smooth things over by backing him up and giving everyone 5 credits, is also right though, that they have to give the people who have just had their faith shattered something more than an explanation. They're going to need something to believe in. The Juliette Lives graffiti popping up shows that they'll find it elsewhere if it doesn't come from IT and Judicial directly. An opposition is coming together in the lower levels. People are looking to Shirley, and even Juliette's shadow Cooper decides to join them when he's supposed to be reporting back about what they're doing to Knox. This has the potential to end badly, but at the end of the episode, Walker tells them as much, and with her there, it seems like they might have a better chance. Bernard believes that if Meadows were helping him, he would have a better chance. I tend to agree, if for no other reason than that she's the only other person who's been in the vault. Not that I want Bernard to succeed, but at least it gives him someone to talk to and fill us in on details so that we can finally piece together the mystery at the heart of the show. Something happened when she was his shadow. There are hints that there may have been something personal between them, but the secrets that she's been keeping, the thing that's kept her out of the vault and in that apartment drinking for the past 25 years, if that was about a failed relationship between them, it wouldn't be a secret from Bernard's point of view. It's the first time in 25 years she doesn't want to be drunk. And if a hot air balloon so that she can fly away isn't on the table, she'll settle for a suit and some of the good tape because she wants to go outside and walk over the hill just as Juliette did. And I just have to say that I love the detail that they have this heavy conversation over an Etch-a-Sketch displayed under glass like it's some treasured artifact showing the great heights some ancient culture achieved. Splitting locations in the first 2 episodes of Silo's second season left a lot of viewers hoping that the entire season wouldn't be structured that way. And the 3rd episode does change things up to split time between both silos. And what a relief, right in the opening exchange we get a fairly significant piece of information. The answer to how many silos there are. There are 50 of them. Steve Zahn's character, who we can also say for sure now is named Solo, because he's in there all alone. He tells Jules that there are 50 silos and his is number 17. 15, 16, and 18 are the closest ones, so Juliette probably came from one of those. We can also now call hers number 18 by putting it together that the 18 on the mysterious fob Bernard was carrying around in season 1 refers to their number. This all makes my job easier, but the real revelation here is that this guy who has been locked away all alone for years knows a lot. In their short introduction, he blows Juliette's mind. Of course, you're from another silo, but which one exactly? And did you happen to notice the position of the sun when you were walking over here? I can't tell for sure if the implication is that she doesn't even know for sure what he means when he says the sun, but through a phenomenal bit of acting, I can say for sure that Juliette can't believe what she's hearing and understand that she must be thinking, what else does this guy know? Unfortunately, the details he provides about how everyone died in Silo 17 hit a little too close to home. It all started with Ron Tucker, the cleaner who didn't clean. He thought it was safe outside. He wanted to go out and check for himself. Instead of cleaning, he just used his finger to write lies in the dirt on the lens. Then he just walked away, and 2 days later, people inside the silo painted the word on the screen, which we see again in the great opening shot of this episode. Solo says that's when the fighting started, and it's at this point in the conversation that Juliette begins to realize that her situation is pretty much the same as Ron's. There's a real chance that the people back in 18 might do the exact same thing. Solo adds that when the fighting broke out, Russell, who the sheriff in episode 1 mentioned, and we find out here had the same job as Bernard, head of IT, Russell put him inside the vault and told him never let anyone in the vault ever. This has become Solo's job. Jules tries to dig for any alternative explanation for why everyone went outside, but her worst fears are confirmed because it really just came down to them not seeing Ron die. The idea that he might still be alive was enough, and when she can't confront this, she leaves to try to put together a suit so that she can go back and try to stop Silo 18 from repeating the disaster that played out in 17. The next time we see her, she's digging around by herself trying to find useful bits and pieces to fix her suit problem. This could come across as filler, since it doesn't tell us anything new about the character, but it's a pretty important scene because it helps define the heart of the problem she's facing, and in some ways has been facing since she left Mechanical. If she just needed to cobble together a suit, if it were purely an engineering problem, she would figure it out. The problem she has to solve here involves a person, and that's the one area the show has gone out of its way to show she's completely lacking in. And it's worse than that, because when she goes back towards the end of the episode and makes herself vulnerable to tell him that she needs him, appeals to his humanity, to his empathy, we're reminded that this is not a normal person she just has to play nice with to get what she needs. When she first returns to the vault door, she gets some much needed food. And as we get a sense of Solo's personality while she slurps down her chicken stew, it becomes apparent how perfect the casting of Steve Zahn was for this role. As he talks, it's evident that he knows a ton about the silo that could be useful to her, but it's all somewhat academic considering most of the things she might be able to use are underwater. He wants to understand why she didn't clean, and points out that sure, everyone says they're not going to do it, but ultimately change their minds. Why was she different? She explains that she figured out why people do it and decided not to because she noticed that what she was seeing out there, the thing that makes the other people clean, this nice, beautiful world that they've been lied to about, what was on her screen was exactly what she saw in the Jane Carmody cleaning video. You know those creatures moving across the sky? Yeah, those are called birds. From him, she wants to understand how he survived in the midst of all the death he's surrounded by. He tries to change the subject, saying he just does his job and likes to read books and listen to music. You know, he's just a totally normal guy hanging out in there. And then she mentions the bodies we saw not far from the door and brings up how they're not as decayed as the ones outside. And this gets into a place he doesn't want to go, and he starts to shut down. On top of that, when she leaves, he explains that he wasn't trying to be nice by giving her the food. He needed her to eat so he'd know she was real. He eventually blasts some music later to signal he's ready to talk again, and this time he has an idea. Firefighters have suits with helmets and breathing rigs, and while our initial reaction is that those aren't made to help people survive, he delivers my favorite line of the episode when he reminds her that cleaning suits aren't either. It might work, but the water is still going to cause problems. That's a problem she thinks she can solve, but it involves a two-person solution. She figured out how to make it happen, but hasn't yet figured out what it'll take to get Solo to help. No amount of reasoning or pleading seems to work, not even stressing that they could save the lives of 10,000 people. The man has a mandate: stay inside the vault, and none of this seems to be persuading him at all. When she closes the door and reads the graffiti saying, "We will get in sooner or later," his reluctance starts to make more sense. sense, as do the bodies outside. On that fateful day, not everyone went outside and died, and it's possible survivors might have been trying to get into the vault for a very long time. How long that went on and how long the bodies have been in the hall are still open questions. Bernard tells Meadows that Silo 17 died before he made her his shadow, so at least 25 years ago, plus however long she was the shadow, and however long it happened before that. We're talking decades at least. Juliette kind of acknowledges this, but also just kind of gives up in light of it and leaves. But as she's walking away to figure out how to make her plan a one-person solution, she hears him scream, "Don't go," and sees that he's decided to come out. He asks her if he looks bad, which is funny, and says in all those years he never came out this far. And he's having what I would describe as an experience after being in there for so long. She appears to be adapting and getting a better idea of how to deal with this damaged human being who looks sort of like a gentle giant standing next to her. But he freaks out and almost falls down, and then freaks out even more when she touches him, so it's going to take some time. He apologizes, saying it's been such a long time, and you can only imagine where his head would be after that. And it ends with him asking, "You really are here, aren't you?" Back in Silo 18, the story is split up again, with the characters from Mechanical doing exactly what Juliette fears they might be doing. Right down to the Juliette lives graffiti in the place of the Ron Tucker graffiti she sees as she explores around 17. Well, we get a behind-the-scenes look at how and why Bernard is making the moves he's making, which we can assume is similar to what Russell was trying to do before the violence broke out in the flashback scene. Concerning the graffiti, a character named Teddy is arrested to set the big confrontation in motion. This is a character we've seen in the background but don't know much about, and everyone gets concerned that they'll try to make an example out of him. Shirley and Knox fall into the roles that were established in episode 2. She's angry and calling for action, and he tries to be more reasonable and diplomatic, hoping to limit the harm that they know Judicial can bring down on them. What's wild is that most of what we see happen is just a result of Bernard following the instructions laid out in the order. It has nothing to do with him being particularly cruel. He's just following the playbook, which I couldn't really comment on it having read the books, but a lot of fans pointed out that the page they showed in the last episode referred to OSHA, which is an agency that operates within the US government. He brings Meadows into the vault, and when you see how clean and high-tech it is, it makes you wonder how Solos looks after he's been holed up in there for more than 25 years eating chicken stew. While she says she tried to forget everything that was in the order, they discuss how it addresses a failed cleaning and graffiti and anything that glorifies the person who fails to clean. They're supposed to blame Mechanical and turn the silo against them. You could tell that she's become fascinated with Juliette and gets hung up on the fact that in the short amount of time she spent with her, Jules didn't seem like someone who would ask to go outside. When she asks him directly, he tries to dodge and bring up the red level relic again, but when she persists, he has to lie and says she did ask to go out. She believes Juliette was singular. No one had ever done anything like that before, so he should try to think outside of the order. Instead of going directly for Mechanical, try to mix things up a little bit. Arrest someone who's doing graffiti up top. Show a little bit of mercy and let Teddy go. She says she knows it'll be hard, and I think for us as viewers who have been watching him all this time, we just sort of know he won't be able to do it. He needs to believe the things the book tells him will work, because otherwise, what was all the terrible stuff he's done for the good of the silo for? She seems to be removed from the situation enough to be seeing things more clearly, and her ideas seem to be better, but we have to remember that she's keeping a secret about something that happened to keep her away from there, and now she also has an agenda of her own because she wants to go out in a suit like Juliette's herself. This is kind of underlined later when she's sitting around watching the video on the relic. Her head is pretty much outside, and even if Bernard doesn't want to hear it, it doesn't appear that she really cares what happens to the silo once she's gone. In pursuit of her agenda, she talks to Billings, and in my last video I brought up the Etch-a-Sketch sitting on the table under glass, and this scene opens with them staring at a mass market frisbee disc that I think is an Arobi, which were popular in the 1980s, and remarking on how how beautiful it is. She invited him over so she could ask about his report on Juliette's cleaning. We'll see him go and interview the final raider who was there, and she doesn't commit to saying she heard her ask to go out. She basically says, well, if they said she said it, then I'm sure she did. When he goes back to tell Meadows about that, he adds the detail that Juliette told him straight up that she didn't ask to go out, and after that, Meadows is sure she still can't trust Bernard. When she's talking to Paul, he tells her that he has the syndrome, which she already knew, and she tells him that there's a theory that it isn't a blood disorder or a vitamin deficiency. It's just a natural human reaction to an unnatural situation. This helps to further explain why she wants to go outside, but also makes you think of Solo. They've been keeping Pete Nichols around for what I assume are reasons. When he can't sleep, he has a run-in with a woman who will end up being his patient. They discuss parenthood and connect, and when she's about to come in after winning this additional lottery that they set up, he gets the message telling him not to remove her birth control. As he's talking to the husband and wife, he decides not to trick them and removes it anyway, and this is something that will probably come back to cause him problems later. I mentioned the major confrontation that started with Teddy's arrest. This plays out with Bernard going to see Sims and inquiring about Patrick Kennedy, who helped Jules at the end of last season and has been held in seclusion ever since. Which, just real quick to add, is brutal and obviously a well-planned prescription provided by the people behind the silo's creation. Guys like Sims didn't come up with an idea for a hood like that in their spare time. Mr. Kennedy believes he's reached the end of his road and just wants to be out of his misery more or less. He's never recovered after the loss of his wife, and he knows things he believes forfeit his right to stay alive. Sims has a two birds with one stone solution. It turns out they have a medication in the silo that can make people forget, which means that old weirdo Flamekeeper Gloria was onto something, and in exchange for erasing his memories all the way back to before he met his wife, Patrick will offer up his services. The plan also requires a retired sharpshooter raider who happens to owe Sims for a favor related to a suspect in an old case. Cooper, who had joined up with Shirley, is now worried about what they're planning. And since he's a good kid and feels loyalty to Knox, he tells him about it. Knox does what he's been doing and tells the sheriff's department in hopes that a show of force will keep things from getting out of control. Shirley's group shows up and demands Teddy's release and starts a chant, and during the standoff, Kennedy throws a Molotov cocktail above the raiders' heads, and the retired raider attempts to shoot him. Cooper saw this going down and tried to intervene, but he ended up taking the worst of it and doesn't end up surviving. I can confidently say that the scenes that involve the fledgling rebellion are the ones I'm least interested in while watching, but also that I felt something when we lost Cooper based on the character development that they gave him before we got here. Everyone in the Down Deep felt it too, and before everything is said and done, Knox and Shirley meet below the silo, where he tells her he's down for the cause, but they have to do things differently. He also makes mention of the names written on the wall that have shown up a few times when we've seen characters down there. He thinks now he understands why they're there, but we'll have to wait because he doesn't tell her yet. Probably what's more of an interesting development is that when Hank calls Billings to tell him what happened and mentions that Patrick Kennedy wasn't a local, he also tells him that they need him in the Down Deep, so it looks like he'll be relocating at least temporarily, which, in case you forgot, the sheriff in the flashback to 17 was down in the Down Deep whenever that rebellion started. The last scene between Bernard and Meadows sets the stage for what comes next in Silo 18. He explains his plan for getting her outside without anyone seeing, and she just wants to know when she can get her suit. There's an awkward sequence where he measures her for it that's tinged with some sort of prior relationship vibes, but it's hard to tell if he was just into her and nothing ever came of it, because talk about singular, he doesn't seem like he's ever with anyone, let alone like he's been with someone. She uses their close proximity and the effect that it has on him to take his temperature, and he lies to her again, claiming that he didn't have anything to do with the scuffle downstairs. She doesn't believe him and points out that it's exactly what the order calls for in that situation, with the goal being to create a rebellion he can crush so that IT can regain control over the silo. She adds that he already lied to her about Juliette asking to go outside, and then tells him to get out and not return until he has her suit. There's a moment in the 4th episode of Silo's 2nd season where Solo comes back out of his vault where he'd been hiding. He'd been having trouble adjusting to life outside, and Juliette made a smart move to bait him with a question about elephants. He'd been telling her about the circus earlier in the episode, shooting off facts like a walking Wikipedia page. Since Jules is busy trying to figure out a way to stop a replay of the rebellion that led to all the carnage she's surrounded by, and also because that's just how she is, it doesn't seem like she's paying much attention. We know very little about how Solo marked time over the past decades, but it's plain this information, the things he knows, were a part of it. And now that he's no longer alone, he isn't capable of turning off the tap. In the scene I mentioned, they both are trying to work together. It's a bit of progress happening. She met him halfway, and he's toned it down. And that lets some sincerity break through all the fear. He knows and says a lot. He has so much information to share. These are things that could be very important if you're trying to piece together the bigger mysteries of the silo and how things were set up there before they were populated. Things like saying it was a nice day when the rebels from his silo went outside, and that they survived longer than Jules would have thought possible based on her experience. Is that the first we heard of a dust cloud? Is any of this crucial information? It's hard to say because his communication skills aren't the greatest, and he's been paired up with someone whose single-mindedness is a defense mechanism against her inability to do people. I brought up the scene where he comes back out of the vault because they could just always do it that way if things were even a little different. But this is where they are, and for Jules, it feels like time is running out. Back in the vault in Silo 18, Bernard has a lot of information too. For him, keeping that information secret isn't just about gatekeeping. The people who put it there thought it was fundamental for the silo's success. It's an interesting flip that makes you think about information and power. Jules's plan to dive so that she can recover a fireman's suit has Solo talking about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And Bernard has dedicated his life to a different book, The Order, that will lead him to chart a disastrous course of events for Judge Meadows by the end of the episode. What stands out here is that the silos appear to be identical, which means they both should have the exact same information to work with inside. If we believe Solo's story, and we imagine the events being reversed, if the rebellion happened in Silo 18 25 years or so ago, then it would be Judge Meadows who found herself locked away when a cleaner who managed to upgrade their heat tape came knocking on her door. When you think about the stratification of information and the expressed method of blaming everything on mechanical, it's not that surprising that Knox and Shirley devise a plan to try to force the up top into giving them answers. Of course, the playbook Bernard is following is something they would never be able to anticipate, or how close to destruction it would lead him rather than having him give them what they want. With the help of the cryptic writings on the wall below the silo that they've been looking at since they were kids, they're starting to realize that mechanical somehow always gets scapegoated. Knox thinks the rebellion that they learned about isn't the only one. He thinks they're generational, and Shirley believes there are so many names on the memorial because mechanical has the power to shut the silo down. Before we learned about the drug that makes people forget, this would be pretty hard to believe. But those names came from somewhere, and they refer to something that doesn't seem to otherwise be a part of the silo's collective memory. They want revenge for Juliette and Coop, but they want answers more than anything. They think they can leverage their control over the generator to get a meeting with the judge, and decide to put a group together to travel up to talk with her. Sims wants to stop them before they get there. He sees this as a threat to Judicial's precarious hold on things. He even calls them a gang, which is funny and pairs nicely with the scene where we watch them getting ready to leave. You have Walker show up and Carla from Supplies there and indicates that she has something in her bag, which initially I thought might be a bomb or something along those lines, but she says that her dogs were upset that she took it, and that had me completely confused. Bernard tries to downplay the threat, and Sims mentions that he knows Bernard has been talking to Meadows. Then he goes to speak with his wife, and realizing that they're holding back information from him, they hatch a plan to start an impeachment campaign against the judge so that Bernard will have to rely on Rob again. In their exchange, she tells him Meadows wasn't always a drunk. The idea that she had a reputation for having a brilliant mind is another detail that makes you wonder what happened 25 years ago. Bernard does meet with her and asks why she agreed to meet with the gang, but seems more preoccupied with her decision to meet with Lucas. She has her reasons and a plan, and she isn't open to hearing Bernard's objections because he doesn't have her suit. The non-drinking judge, who doesn't care about much because she plans to go outside anyway, is a lot of fun to watch. She sums up the basis for Lucas's appeal to "it isn't fair," and I think how this plays out is funny to everyone except for him. She's so thoroughly uninterested in hearing what he has to say that he asks why she even bothered to grant him the review in the first place. Once she's done explaining why the mines are crucial for the silo's survival, she asks the guards to leave, and they have a conversation I didn't fully understand until she explained it to Bernard later. She asks him about his old hobby of watching the lights in the sky, and is visibly impressed to see how close he gets to explaining celestial mechanics. He appears to be pumped up sharing his theories. She seems excited to hear them and then starts to reciprocate, telling him they're giant balls of gas called stars and there are billions of them. Yes, we do move around the sun. And then as their conversation hits a crescendo, forbidden information shared freely in a way so many people in this story long for, she calls the guards back in and has them take him back to the mines. She shortened his sentence to 5 years, but this was just a move to make them seem fair. When she explains this decision to Bernard, she says a guy like him will never last more than a year in the mines, which is a fairly brutal final move knowing that her clock is officially ticking. She went to his office because after the guards escorted Lucas out, she saw a group of protesters hanging impeachment banners outside her window. We know this is coming from Sims, but she initially thought it was Bernard. He denies any involvement, and we'll find out later that this time he's telling the truth. He apologizes that it's happening, and she says it doesn't matter because she'll be long gone before it goes through. He invites her to his apartment to talk next steps and gets her to agree by telling her she can try her suit on. While the Meadows story is the core of this episode, some other things do happen. I mentioned the party of mechanical delegates getting ready to leave, and we check in with them on their journey. You get a sense of how easy it is for the powers that be to play into the divisions as things get more hostile the further away from the down deep they get. There's a scene that involves a stop along the way to take everyone's temperatures. It actually had my TV senses kicking in, making me wonder if one of them wasn't going to make it. Walker and Carla have another heartfelt one-on-one about how she hadn't come out of her hole for 25 years. Knox and Shirley talk about how they would volunteer to go out and look around if Meadows agrees to let that happen. Knox even gets poetic, saying what he'd want to see is the distance. I think you need something like this occasionally to keep it fresh in your mind how abnormal their normal is living underground. I see a lot of posts and comments where people pick up on details and say, why don't they just do this? Or why would they do something like that? And some of these questions seem to fail to take that into account. Plus, as we learned in the last episode, it's very possible that not only have they spent their entire lives never seeing a window to the outside other than the screen that's filled with dead bodies from people just like them who went out to clean, but now and again they may also be getting involuntarily amnesia. There are some differences in the way the show introduced this concept, so I'm not even sure from reading the books, but what Bernard said to Rob last episode sounded like they pulled in all of the employees who were working in the janitorial closet when Jules flashed the cleaning on the screens, the ones he told forget what you just saw to, which sounded ridiculous at the time. They took all those people and erased their memories of the incident while telling them they were giving them something for anxiety. Knox also mentions that even though Juliette annoyed him endlessly, he also knew he could trust her with his life. This gets at this idea of her being singular that Meadows brought up in the last episode. And when they learn that Sheriff Billings sent an escort for them, the deputy is accompanied by Sandy, who never really liked Jules when she worked at the sheriff's office, but definitely came around to her in a way. I was a little surprised that they brought her back for such a minor scene and wondered if she might not get reintegrated into the story, even though things were fairly wrapped up as far as her character was concerned. I mentioned Sheriff Billings, and we see him get ready and eventually leave for the Down Deep. His wife is worried, and I think that adds to the setup of opening the season with a flashback of the rebels from Mechanical being led by the sheriff from Silo 17. He does some detective work with Hank and starts to unfold the mystery surrounding Patrick Kennedy's involvement with the riot that led to Coop's death, but we already know that Sims put that together with Bernard's blessing. Most of these scenes set up the question of whether he can uncover Judicial's complicity in time to make a difference, and what that might mean. The big development is that Patrick Kennedy lived and disappeared, and also that the Raiders took Coop's body. Lucas's ability to think through something as complicated as the stars in the sky like a 17th century astronomer threatens to kind of control the order calls for. While Juliette is starting to figure out how to approach things with Solo, this episode hints that his instability could threaten her hopes of ever leaving. In pursuing the fire suit, which almost spells the end for her when the weight that she's using gets stuck to prevent her from surfacing temporarily, Solo as a helper is kind of a mixed bag. In the pros column, he's got elephant and circus facts. He comes up with a good idea to use the bellows from the harmonium for their pump and gets some style points for being able to play it while he introduces his solution to her. He does the job she gives him when he has to run the pump, and he does eventually come around after his big outburst about getting locked out. In the cons column, he periodically freaks out, thinking he left the vault unlocked in this episode. It's been clear that there are some things he doesn't want to talk about, which seems fair enough. If you look at the wall around the lock and think about how long someone was probably banging on that with a pick while he was hiding inside, or the messages scrawled all over the wall, you can imagine there are things he wouldn't want to talk about. It's not just that, though. At the end of the day, they accomplish their mission, and Jules gets the suit. These two are really good at playing off each other, and Steve Zahn has some standout moments. I may not have ever thought Juliette would die during the dive, but some of the shots that are taken from a distance remind you how creepy it would be in the empty silo. Almost like you're always being watched, and I'm not sure how they put together a scene like the one where she beats on the lockers to get the suit out, but Rebecca Ferguson sold it in a way that made it look like they told her, here are some metal lockers, please try to bang on them until you get to the suit inside, and she just did it for real. What sticks with you is when they go into the classroom, and Jules can't really put her finger on it, but something about how he reacts just seems off. He sees a backpack and talks about a girl named Lapis he used to know. And it's kind of sweet, but he also talks like the backpack he's holding was hers before Juliette points out it would be impossible given her age when the rebellion happened, and then he just sort of changes his story. When you put things like that together with his general uneasiness that we saw throughout this episode, and those bodies that are outside the vault that she pointed out aren't as old as the other ones, there's a sense that there's more going on. Things wrap up in Silo 17 with the scene I talked about in the beginning. There is progress, but red flags abound in a situation where she has no other option but to trust him. Part of how she gets through to him is by talking about her fear when she got sent outside and trying to use this as a way to tell him he's not alone. It's not an easy sell to someone who has been just that for so long, even if they want to believe it. Silo 18 has its, hey, let's talk about that circus thing you were telling me about scene while Bernard prepares dinner for the judge. Like his Silo 17 counterpart, he also listens to records. And there's a great scene of him putting what looks like real care into the dish he'll serve. The meal seems intentional, and my initial thought was this was a sad guy, sad about someone he fell in love with who would never reciprocate, preparing a meal that he knows won't change things, but he still can't help but try to impress her, and he still has a sliver of hope that things might be different. This season, Judge Meadows' story is a TV show only thing, which meant I had no idea what was coming. And I have to say I'm impressed with how they set this up to surprise me. I mean, just like you don't expect Juliette to die when she's risking her life to accomplish her goals, I didn't expect Bernard to go against everything, give her a suit, and watch her walk away. Still, I also didn't think things would turn this quick for the character who's been a real standout this season. Part of why this works so well happened earlier. Meadows is making moves and can adapt to situations, while Bernard just waits for things to happen and then does what the order says he should do. She understands this. While she's been swept up in this fever to follow in Juliette's footsteps, she has the right read on Bernard, and it just always feels like she'd stay a step ahead of him. And when I say she did not, I mean he wasn't the sad guy making the sad "she'll never love me" meal. He was making her Last Supper. These two actors make this reveal land so hard as he watches her realize what happened. After the shock subsides enough, she can ask about how he pulled it off. I know it wasn't in the wine, it was the mushrooms. How long do I have? Minutes rather than hours. It's the same conversation we've seen them have as they discuss what they should do to keep things under control in the silo. So when she asks why, she already knows it was about following the order before he says it. Her death will unite the silo. With time running out, she asks about the hard drive, which is still destroyed. Was there something on it? She says even if he did know what it was, he wouldn't be able to do anything about it. It happens so fast, but if you think about it, this has to be a real blow to the person controlling the information. She tells him it had something to do with Salvador Quinn, a name unfamiliar to us, but he recognizes as the head of IT during the rebellion 140 years ago. She mentions a letter he wrote, part of which was code, but won't give in to his pleas to tell him what it said. Instead, she tells him that she lied when she stepped down as his shadow, saying it was because she didn't want to be tethered to him for the rest of her life. She crushes him by saying she would have happily been by his side, but knew that he could never fully give himself to her. His position and the need to believe in and follow the order would always have been first. Before she quit, she disappeared for 4 days, but she won't tell him where she went or why she left after that. It's not really played as her being cruel, but it is notable that she's withholding answers to the person who knows more than anyone. She asks to go to the cafeteria one more time to see outside, something he won't do, but he does have a VR headset with an immersive Costa Rica experience that he's watched so many times he's memorized that they can watch instead. They share the moment together as two people who can only dream about the things she sees. And when the end starts to close in on her, she asks the real question at the heart of the silo's existence. What did humanity do to lose that world? The way she says it makes it seem like they don't know. But given that he has nearly complete information and she has a lot of secrets, the context shifts from what happened to how they could let that happen. It's a bummer to lose the character, but her death was only the first part of his plan to unite the silo. He has Sims move the body to her office and set the scene to make it look like a murder. A little while later, the mechanicals show up, and when the angry up-toppers don't want to let them pass, they turn out to have a plan for that. Carla drops her dog's red ball over the railing to send the signal to cut the power. It's the one card they had to play, and they played it, and it appears to get Bernard's attention. He comes to meet them, agrees to let Shirley and Knox see the judge, but it's all really just leading them into his trap. The body is waiting there. It looks like they committed murder, and instead of arresting them, they let Knox and Shirley go so that they could have Rob stir up the crowd to let them seek justice for themselves. It's unsettling, and even Sims has some reservations with how things play out. Bernard has already done much worse and has no choice but to stick with his chosen path. Before he sends him to get the crowd to chase after the gang, he tells Sims why his choice to press for impeachment forced his hand. He believes good will come out of it, but wants to make sure that he tells him he knows what he's up to before all hell starts to break loose. The episode ends with him inciting the mob to bring those animals from mechanical to justice as they run downstairs with what looks like about a 0% chance of getting away. The midway point of Silo's second season gives us a transitional episode in the aftermath of Judge Meadows' surprise exit. Things in Silo 18 have been focused on Bernard's response to the unprecedented events surrounding Juliette's cleaning, with Meadows being the only person he felt like he could let in on his thinking. He spends much of the episode in a way we've never quite seen him in her absence, opening the door for new characters to emerge to fill the void. Sims learns he'll likely never ever be the one. But his wife is a character that went from mildly interesting, sort of nudging Rob in the direction he wanted to go, having a pretty intense encounter with Jules when she showed up on the run. Will Camille turn out to be a real player this season? What about Galileo Jr., Lucas Kyle? We have some interesting developments as Bernard scrambles and Shirley, Knox, Walker, and Carla run for their lives. If we're thinking about how the back half of the season will shake out, characters like Pete Nichols are also of interest. We keep checking in with Juliette's dad while he isn't doing much, almost just getting reminders that he's part of the cast. And that makes you wonder if there isn't something big in his future. He is doing stuff. He decided not to go through with the Code Orange order for the last lottery patient who visited him. When Bernard calls him in to give him some of his daughter's personal effects and to subtly warn him to remain on the right side of things as they restore order in the silo and faith in the pact, he points out that he has nothing left to lose. He wasn't helping the wounded out of a sense of duty to the silo. He was trying to get back some of the professional integrity he gave up by putting his head down and following orders. It stands out because it almost makes him a voice for the other people in the silo. But he's not like them at all when you really think about it. He's lost a son, a wife, and now his daughter, all while doing their bidding and keeping their secrets. He's also pretty insignificant other than he could cause chaos if he exposed how some families were singled out to not have kids. So I don't know. I expect they've spent so much time reminding us he's still there for a reason, but can't exactly figure out how he'll be important. He's not wrong when he tells Bernard that he can't control what Juliette means to people or what she means to him, and he looks good saying it. This also gives Tim Robbins a chance to do a face where he's presenting resolve, but also somehow it looks like he's squirming inside while he's hearing what he says. Before he was called in to see the head of IT, he had a brief conversation with Kathleen Billings. She and her husband are other characters who could influence future events. I mentioned last time that Paul's investigation is a little less compelling since we already know the answers he's searching for. This week he made some progress working with Hank after finding out everything was getting turned on its head in the upper levels while he was away. These two have a pretty good exchange that weirdly works, even though what they say is super on the nose. Hank expresses how big of a conflict it is to be a sheriff's deputy while half of the silo is hunting his friends thinking they're killers. Paul says it's about as big as being sworn to enforce the pact while having a condition expressly condemned by the pact. This gets at the bigger picture, and the direct conflict hints at a coming struggle for some of the most sympathetic cops you could imagine. They stretch the limits of that when they throw their weight around and shake down Patrick Kennedy's niece to find out where he's been hiding. He's below the silo, nursing his gunshot wound, and it doesn't look like he has much time left when they get there. Kennedy has reason to believe he's the type of loose end that needs taking care of, but it's Billings that finds him, and he's on the edge of an existential crisis. There's a bit earlier where he talks to Bernard and he sort of reaffirms his dedication to the pact, and it sounds so empty. Talking to the very shot and bleeding man, he starts citing the pact, and Patrick says it's all a lie to keep them in line. They'll never find out the truth, and Sims would kill them both before he'd let that happen. Paul's just there being Paul, following his reflex to do his job. But when Kennedy hints that he has information about Sims and then won't follow through and share, he offers him the page from the Georgia travel guide that he took from Juliette's. It gives Kennedy leverage over him and earns his trust. He asks for a doctor and promises to tell him everything he knows, while indicating that some of it is probably stuff he doesn't even want to know. This could lead to some revelations, and in Silo 17 we get some of those, or maybe it's more accurate to say some of what wasn't making sense about Solo is starting to come into focus. On top of that, we did get a couple of direct answers to questions a lot of people were asking. How did the generator fail in Silo 17? And how do they still have power with 100 levels being underwater? The first one is simple. IT has its own power source, which is interesting just because of why would they have that, but also because this might be connected to the info Lucas finds on the hard drive, which we'll get to later. Solo says the power comes from outside. This is mysterious, but he can't offer any more information, just like from up. From the outside, you know? Also, the story of how the generator failed is that some judicial raiders blew up a groundwater pump to flood Mechanical. Then they couldn't get it fixed before it took out the generator. In my episode 1 video, I came to the conclusion that Mechanical did it themselves to force IT to open the airlock, and I suppose this means I was wrong. It makes more sense based on what we've seen and gives some credence to Shirley's theory that they always try to blame Mechanical and turn the silo against them because they have the power to shut things down. Plus, given the decisions we've seen Bernard make, you wouldn't put it past him to try to do something similar if push came to shove, and most importantly, if the order told him to do that. The Q&A session gives Solo an idea. Since the water is still rising and Juliette is good at solving problems, she could help him fix his silo before the water submerges IT, which is something that's going to happen in 10 months. She figures out how it could be done, but doesn't have time and won't even consider it with all the lives at stake in 18. But this feels like something that could come back up. The real meat of the Silo 17 story arrives after Juliette finds some troubling facts while looking for a missing suit helmet. Earlier in the episode, Solo tells her his real name is Cole Myers. He tells a story about Russell's kid. Remember, Russell was the head of IT, and his son heard Cole say he came to an event solo and thought that was his name. We also pick up a minor detail that their versions of Romeo and Juliet are different, and a major one when we find out that Jules has an injury she's kept secret that's starting to cause her real problems. It turns out that Solo's story has a lot of those. Jules winds up in an apartment in her search for the helmet, where she finds a painted picture of Solo and a woman named Trina Samuels. Problem number 1 is that it's not this guy she's been stuck with at all. And problem number 2 is that when she finds employee photos, it is Cole Myers, which was the name imposter Solo gave her earlier. His not being honest about who he is only the first mystery here. Why would he need to lie in the first place, and what could he be hoping to cover up? He lives in the apocalypse, you know, he's there by himself. Why lie? It's unsettling, but he cranks that up to 1,000 when she asks why. Why are you lying to me? He doubles down and resorts to what I think you would have to call throwing a tantrum. He just unloads and won't let her get in a word edgewise. There seem to be multiple issues in play, and the previously mentioned injury prevents Jules from pushing back. Instead, she decides to leave and look for the helmet. The outburst goes back to the parallel between him and Bernard that I brought up in my last video. While Bernard's insecurities about the truth of his situation are something he keeps hidden, Solo's, or whatever this guy's name is, are on full display here. It looks as though he might wish to be able to take it back almost immediately after it happens. It's definitely crazy. It doesn't paint him in a good light. But you'd like to think that you know where it's coming from, even if you aren't sure why this lie is necessary. When she's alone, we get a look at the wound, which looks to be festering. After that, there's good news and bad news. The good thing is that she finds the helmet under the bed and will be much closer to finishing her suit so that she can leave. The bad is that she passes out right after she finds it, and I'm not sure how great we're supposed to feel about her being unconscious with only Solo around to help now that we've seen another side of him. Back in 18, the bulk of the episode follows the failed delegation turned wanted fugitives as they do something that always seems a little impossible in a silo. They try to run and hide. Their ultimate goal is to reach the relative safety of the Down Deep, where they count on sympathetic citizens to help them remain free. The pursuit of truth has put them on the path to a cleaning. A chance to follow in Juliette's footsteps, if only not exactly how they were hoping to do that. Even if there wasn't a blockade between where they were and where they're trying to get to, and the crowds weren't getting more and more stirred up by plainclothes raiders calling for vengeance for Judge Meadows, Walker and Carla are a little past their prime as far as races down the stairs are concerned. Before long, Carla gets to a point where she can't continue. At first, it appears that she makes up for what she lacks in physical prowess and her connections. She leads them to a shady porter she has history with, and he offers to smuggle them down in grain bins for the right price. It's risky for everyone involved, and the high-priced item he wants in return is anything that belonged to Jules. Given Knox's size, Carla doesn't believe the grain bins would work, and she mentions a winch that the porter doesn't want to discuss. They make their living moving things around, up and down the stairs, so they have an interest in suppressing anything that could make them obsolete. It doesn't turn out to matter in their first encounter because Knox bursts in saying they have to leave. He turned them in for the bounty, which I don't think I've mentioned yet, which is quite high and also working against their chances of getting away. The bounty is on Knox and Shirley, not on all four of them, so they split up. Then when Walk and her ex-wife find a place to sit down, Carla tells her she should leave too. She can't walk, and no one knows what Walker really looks like since she's been in her apartment for 25 years. One of them getting away is at least something. So they say their goodbyes, and a little while later the raiders come to take Carla into custody. Shirley and Knox cover a lot more distance but never make it anywhere. The deck is stacked against them. Judicial has cameras to watch them, agents to plant in plain clothes to stir up a crowd that's ready to go. And you have to keep in mind the express plan here is to incite the mob to deliver justice themselves, not arrest them and take them to jail. It almost plays out like that, and then Camille shows up in her old raider gear and makes a desperate plea on behalf of her husband, the new judge, making a pretty smart argument. Her point is that mob justice would take away from the chance to send them out to clean, which would equate to justice for the whole silo. Of course, she isn't there to bring them in. It's no secret she's had designs that included making her husband Bernard's shadow. The show's laid the groundwork for the Sims having their own plan for as long as I can remember. The question has been, what are they trying to accomplish? This episode paid a little more attention to that than what we'd seen previously. But she also takes these two and stashes them in a closet after throwing out the guy who lives there to give them a fighting chance, and then doesn't mention it to Rob when she sees him later that night. Throughout the episode, we watch the aftermath of their failed attempt to pressure Judge Meadows with their impeachment campaign. When they were talking about it, their son came into the room to tell them there was a man in their kitchen. When they find Bernard having trouble making a cup of coffee there, it's obvious to him that Camille is in on whatever Sims is up to. He's still upset about having to kill Meadows and tells Rob that he betrayed him and made him do something he didn't want to do. For that, he'll be punished. He'll never be his shadow. He's removing him from his post as head of judicial security and making him take Mary's place as judge, a job we know just functions as IT's puppet. Sims spends the episode unable to get on board with this turn of events. He walks around pretty much lost. And when they're together, Camille tries to be supportive but also tries to find ways he can turn things around. She tries to get him to catch Shirley and Knox beating Judicial at their own game that he set up. And when that doesn't work, she makes her own move to stop the mob from taking justice into its own hands. This feels like something we should pay attention to for someone who's mostly been a background character. One of the small details in her part of the story that I liked and connected back to Shirley and Knox was this character Asa and his squat in the closet. Who knows what is actually going on between these two? I mean the exact details. The point is, this guy is afraid of her, something he tells Knox and Shirley directly and tells them that they should be too, and he has a place that's as off the radar as it can be in the silo. The main reason is that the camera in that alleyway is broken. His story is unimportant, but it's just one of those things like, say, Patrick Kennedy going to the only place he could go, the area below the silo, to bleed out. Billings and Hank just continue to do their jobs for the sheriff's department, and Bernard needing to follow the order regardless of the cost. There aren't that many options when you live there in the silo. When Asa is on his way out, he says he's just a hardworking guy whose main job is to keep the silo running. I've come back to this saying several times, and this time Knox brings it back up when he's talking to Shirley. It's something he's used himself several times to rally the people in Mechanical. Having everyone think that their job is something that's necessary to making the silo go is an essential part of the equation. And thinking about that and how asking nicely was the wrong way to approach that situation leads them to the truth that they were damned from the beginning either way. In the short term, this will lead these two back to the porter's apartment to pick up Chekhov's winch. That sets up one of the action set pieces, which, if I'm being honest, haven't been my favorite move the show likes to make. It's put together fine, and the ending sequence, when they've already made it down and the new head of security has shot the cable to give Knox a grievous injury on his back, that part was all pretty intense. I don't know, it just feels like a different show when they go in this direction, and it doesn't mesh as nicely as you'd like. They do survive and make it past the blockade. They're pulled back up over the rail by friendlies below the line of demarcation. The people above who watched it all happen in real time break through the barrier, and it looks like a riot is fixing to break out when we cut away. So in the long term, it looks like there's going to be some violence breaking out. Another guy that's currently doing a job that keeps the silo running is Lucas down in the mines. Bernard has called him up for a conversation, and I thought it was funny that he looks like he's been through the ringer, and one of the first things he says is that he's only been working for a day. Bernard toys with him a bit before getting to what he wants. He needs him to recover the information on the hard drive he destroyed, even though there are much better candidates to do the job in IT, because he knows that Lucas will be working on it as if his life depended on it. This is on par with everything else we see in this episode. And in this case, the intellect that made Meadows and Bernard think this guy could be a real threat also works to get some answers, which we can imagine the head of IT is obsessed with since the judge wouldn't provide any in her final moments. He's able to recreate part of a map, something we saw George and Allison discover at the beginning of the series. He mentions lines coming in from the outside, which appear to connect with Solo's mention of the power coming from the outside. Speaking of George, he also finds the tunnel at the bottom of the map he was looking for. In the finale, when Jules mentioned the big metal door below the silo, it looked like Bernard had no idea what she was talking about. Lucas's use of these two maps together explains why that's the case. His information isn't as complete as he thought it was. Like he did when talking to Juliette, Bernard brushes it off without giving up its importance, which is easy enough since that's not the only thing Lucas found. He also discovered a scan of a handwritten letter Salvador Quinn had written to his wife. This is the letter that Judge Meadows mentioned, and at this point, you'd have to guess that at some time she had this hard drive, and that's why she brought it up after she was poisoned. Either way, Bernard can't hide his interest in this one. It starts out as a love letter, but then gets kind of weird. It's the coded letter the judge was talking about, and something you'd have to imagine Bernard will want to crack as soon as possible. That'll buy another day or maybe longer away from the mines and put Lucas in a position to be a major factor in the rest of the season. Bernard tells his new head of security, Admonson, that a truth has applied to human civilization from the before times. Only 9 missed meals separate a functioning society from chaos. Before I looked this up, I thought it sounded about right. Think about people rushing to local markets to hoard essentials when news gets out about a potential natural disaster or some other threat to the supply chain. 3 days of empty cupboards and store shelves with no plan to turn things around seems long enough for a panic to take over. You might like to think people would work together, but as Walker finds out when she tries to rally the group around this idea that, hey, we're not like those greedy up-toppers, we're mechanical and we work together and share what we've got and so on and so forth. When it comes down to being able to feed your kids or protect one of your own who may actually be guilty of murdering the judge, because who knows, most people will pick their kids or just pick themselves when it comes down to it. Since I mentioned looking it up, Bernard is referencing the original quote by Alfred Henry Lewis, which appeared in a March 1906 issue of Cosmopolitan magazine. There are only 9 meals between mankind and anarchy. From the head of IT's point of view, stopping the porters and deliveries going into the down deep makes sense. There's also the rat poison incident, which means that by the time Shirley addresses the angry crowd, accusing Sims and Bernard of framing them, the food has already become a problem. When Walker makes her plea that I mentioned a minute ago, saying that giving them up would be a win for the very people who are creating the crisis in the first place, survival is starting to take precedence over justice or just rational decision making. There's a reprieve when a food shipment makes it down the recycling chute with the message "Juliette lives" from a group of sympathizers above. Bernard is actually happy to hear about that though, saying it'll accelerate their timeline. The episode is titled Barricades, and if the one on level 130 were allowed to stay in place and could effectively keep much needed resources from making it to the lower levels, there's a version of this story where they never get to war. It may instead involve Shirley and Knox going out to clean or having them hung outside of Judicial as Walker warned, but they would eventually get their food. One of the first things we saw Knox do this season was visit his friend in the metal shop with 2 asks. The first was to not make weapons for anyone who came asking, and we didn't hear the second until this episode when we learned that he told him to make them all for him instead. It's a pretty shrewd reallocation of resources. Enough so that when they surprise the raiders at the blockade with a 2-phase attack that involves cutting up through the floors, he's able to confront him on the bridge and tell him as a matter of fact that if fighting breaks out, the raiders might kill 10 of his guys, but they'll all die and lose the steps in the process. Judicial is left with no choice but to agree to moving the barricade. And it's a big deal because, as an incensed Bernard points out, that they now have control of one of the farms on the mids. Overall, this was fun to watch play out, and it's kind of a fist pump moment when Knox tells Admonson how it is. But I think the best parts of this episode happen away from the action, and what's most interesting is piecing together how it's all connected. Bernard continues to be the center of things and really the core of the Silo 18 story this season, which, if you have the option of letting Andy Dufresne cook, you're gonna do that, right? In episode 6, he splits time watching the monitors, being decisive while coordinating his plans with Judicial Security, and then going off on some mini quests where he displays varying degrees of instability. The first of these is a trip to see Camille Sims at work. He accuses her of assisting the murderers, but she's ready and has a story. It's not a very good one, and she doesn't do much to sell it, but she's smart enough to present it all in a way that's PAC compliant, which leaves him no choice but to accept it. And of course, I mean publicly he accepts it. Her story hinges on preventing the crowd from delivering mob justice, so he reminds her that her husband was the one who called for that in the first place. He asks how Rob replied to the news, and she lies, saying he backed her up. He doesn't believe her, and there's an unspoken threat of "we'll see about that," which means she'll have to figure something out. Even though she's not telling him everything, since he doesn't know about it, Rob keeps her in the loop, including when he finds out that the mechanicals are cutting through the floor when one of the techs can't get Admonson to listen to him. There's a sense that Rob might use this to his advantage, but he essentially spends another episode sidelined while she continues making moves. He looks for Bernard and finds Lucas instead, which puts him in another funny situation. The actor who plays him has good timing and delivery, but we'll return to him. Camille ultimately takes the info and tips off security to the coming ambush, and that puts her on the right side of things if Bernard continues to come after her. It's still pretty hard to get a clear picture of what she's after. Even in this case, Rob compels her to act, and you can't really tell if she knew that was going to happen and she was trying to get him to do it or what. So this doesn't reveal much other than she doesn't want her motivations to be exposed. Since he feels the walls closing in on him as his plans aren't panning out, Bernard decides to see the only person he can talk to. Unfortunately, he killed Meadows a couple of episodes back and has to talk to her corpse in the morgue. He laments the situation and worries aloud if 140 years of stability could end on his watch. He apologizes but resorts to explaining things as an equation, which, even though he's expressing sorrow and regret, still kind of dehumanizes the victim he's sitting in front of. I think their relationship and the way they would discuss decisions in this same way, she was an active participant in these kinds of decisions, as well as the fact that he's alone here and being completely honest, add a lot of weight to the uncharacteristic emotion he shows here. Also, the way he says events forced me when referring to what the Sims did to force his hand, that tells you that his conversation with Camille at her desk won't be their last. The final thing Bernard is involved in behind closed doors is the work Lucas is doing on Salvador Quinn's code. We get some insight into some of his failed attempts, with one producing a single word, the name of Quinn's daughter, Allie. It's something, or maybe it's nothing. While Bernard appreciates his thinking, he believes the code is too sophisticated to crack by conventional means. It's a code within a code, and he tells him he would have to see the legacy to solve it. This is the first we've heard of this, and before we have a chance to ponder what it might be, he surprises everyone, and even more so Lucas, when he tells him to stand up and asks him if he wants to be a shadow. This happened in a much different way in the book, and because it hadn't happened yet, it gave some book readers who like to complain that the show doesn't stick close enough to the original story some ammunition to work with. Personally, I was happy to see where they went with it, but I wasn't sure if they could pull it off even with the early exit of Judge Meadows, so I was happily surprised at how well it turned out. The show's version of Bernard is in a much more desperate place, as is Lucas. If you really think about it, some part of Lucas knows that he's only worth keeping around as long as Bernard needs his expertise. But what will he do otherwise? Go back and die in the mines? Killing Mary limited his choices, and other candidates haven't presented themselves as things devolved closer to chaos. This is where he is and what he has to work with. And it feels spicy if for no other reason than the legacy sounds important. The scene is executed really well, as both actors do all the things I've been pointing out about their performances to make it a memorable 16 seconds of screen time. Lucas's hesitation and Bernard's return to a strict adherent of the pact and order all make you excited to see where things go next for this unlikely alliance. Also, based on their interaction earlier in the episode, imagine Rob's reaction when he hears about the new IT Shadow. On the other side of the barricade, Patrick Kennedy's situation pretty much ties all the other characters together, with Sheriff Billings being the odd man out as an up-topper in the down deep. He's trying to keep up his end with Kennedy, but the doctor from the lower levels got stuck when visiting family in the mids and can't get back below level 130. His shadow's willing to remove the bullet, but his lack of access to painkillers forces Paul to look for another solution. He turns to his wife, who we saw have a chance encounter with the doctor just last episode, and she goes to see Pete Nichols and asks him to do her husband this favor. She even helps grease the wheels by acting fast when they try to turn them away at the barricade, and is rewarded by being reunited with her husband, who's glad to see his family but is also worried at the same time, and she reassures him that it's dangerous everywhere, so they might as well be together. Paul and Hank continue to work together, and they have another brief conversation where they underline the contradictions they're dealing with. The sheriff is still of the mind that Knox and Shirley need to be brought in for the good of the silo, and Hank, who clearly doesn't want to see that happen, talks about taking his oath with Holston and commits to following the current sheriff's lead. Juliette's dad removes Patrick's bullet, and possibly because he's high, he immediately balks at telling them the information he promised to deliver in return. There's a moment when Paul has everyone leave so he can be alone with Kennedy, and it feels like we might see a real unexpected turn in the character. It shows how much he's worked his way into the story's fabric, and I was just thinking, wait, Mr. I won the pack contest 4 times or whatever is about to torture this guy? He ends up just threatening to give up his location to Sims, which is enough and which works. After saying that hearing it will ruin his life, Patrick starts to talk about the cleaning video and how the outside is really beautiful, like so beautiful he can't even describe it. He tells him about the deal Sims offered him. By now, Patrick isn't sure if the memory drugs were ever on the table or if they're even a thing, but it's damning evidence for Billings to process. He tops it off by asking if there wasn't a little piece of him that wishes he never heard it. And this goes back to that idea that I mentioned earlier about bits and pieces of information coming down inside this situation. We see how they impact everyone a little bit differently, but it's generally overwhelming across the board. The sheriff is a busy guy in this episode, and his next stop is Walker's workshop, Earlier, he stopped by to question her about what happened to Judge Meadows, and she told him that she never went in. She insisted she wouldn't talk to anyone about anything until they could tell her what happened to Carla. He returns to say he couldn't find out where she was, which probably means she's being held in seclusion, which is kind of frightening since we saw Kennedy's treatment there. She begs him to do something as sheriff because she's worried about her ex's health issues, and he says he might be able to get her out if he can clear her name first. To make that happen, he needs to know what happened to Meadows, and it cuts away before we hear Walker's version of the story. Based on his next destination, we know she told him the truth, and before he drops in on Knox and Shirley, we see them share a kiss over a celebratory drink, and I don't know, it's kind of hot right up until he interrupts them. He's not there to make an arrest. He believes Walker's story, or at least he believes it's possible, and when he calls Bernard, he refuses to give up their location. He wants a full investigation into the events leading to the death of the judge, and Bernard doesn't let him finish before ordering security to disable all radio communications in the silo. He knows he lost his sheriff, and it's another great scene when he says as much. And I guess for now that means that Billings is isolated. Knox thanks him, and he responds with a newfound resolve. He doesn't stand with the mayor, the judge, or even them. He says he stands with the law, and it looks like a switch has been flipped inside him. A monumental change like that from someone in his position takes some time to set in, and he starts to question his decision after his wife tells him how brave it was. Brave, maybe. Stupid, definitely. But when she gets him to see that he hasn't been taking his herbs for the syndrome for days and his hand isn't shaking, it feels like he's moving in the right direction. The last bit from Silo 18 involves Dr. Pete, who I lumped into the category of characters I was watching in my last video. After fixing Patrick Kennedy up, he's now stuck in the lower levels and takes the opportunity to visit Walker and thank her for taking care of Juliette for all those years. He gets confirmation about her switching the tape, and they connect because of how much Juliette means to both of them. You can imagine something developing from that. As I was saying, some of these characters are being set up to do something, even if it's not completely clear where the show's heading. But the scene really serves to set up the only one that takes place in Silo 17 in this episode. Walker says she doesn't believe Juliette's alive, but of course she still is. But she's not in great shape currently. Actually, she's doing a lot better than when we saw her pass out in episode 5. She wakes up and remembers she found the helmet. She's ready to put on her suit and head home, even though that would be a terrible idea. Solo is there, and he didn't murder her, and he actually took care of her, and we have a classic good news, bad news situation. We knew she had a terrible infection, so the good news is that he gave her antibiotics and nursed her back to health. The bad news is that he took her suit hostage and doesn't want to give it back until she fixes the pump in Silo 17 so he doesn't end up underwater. His asking her to do it in the first place wasn't a completely unreasonable request. After all, it's the kind of thing she's good at. And this empty silo and that vault are the only things he's known for at least 25 years. Plus, he has nowhere to go. Taking the suit while she's asleep, and just the way he comes off here seems like it could be a little more sinister though. And we'll have to wait and see on that because the episode ends there. Imagine growing up in the silo. You're kind of a mama's boy working in IT who spends most of your free time sitting alone in the level 1 cafeteria looking at the lights in the night sky. You've been doing that long enough that you've started to notice patterns. And you're smart enough that even though you've never been taught anything about astronomy, you've started to piece together celestial mechanics. You were also born looking like Avi Nash, because this might be a completely different kind of story if that wasn't the case. But overall, for a silo resident, you've got to feel pretty good about your prospects. Then, without missing a night's worth of stargazing, you meet Juliette, the new edgy sheriff who was born looking like Rebecca Ferguson. If you knew what planets were, you'd think they had just aligned. Your lack of experience isn't even a deal breaker, but a failed attempt at going in for a kiss is nothing compared to what follows. When you get the invitation to come over to the apartment, you end up being mixed up with the red level relic. And even though you don't help your potential girlfriend because you're worried about that mother I mentioned earlier, you get sent to the mines anyway, where you'll likely be worked to death. Then, after one chance of reprieve is cruelly pulled away, along with any other hope as your appeal is denied, seemingly out of nowhere you're brought back up to assist the most powerful person in the silo, and installed as his shadow to be his successor. All with full knowledge you're expendable and may only last as long as you're useful, and then you learn that you're about to be privy to something that only a handful of people in the silo's history have had access to. That's where Lucas Kyle is at the beginning of this episode when Bernard opens the vault and shows him the legacy. If you're like me, the whole time Bernard is showing him around where he'll be staying while he familiarizes himself with it, you're thinking Solo has all this same stuff where he's been living in Silo 17? To emphasize just how far removed this is from the normal silo resident experience, we watch as Shirley pulls all the resources of the Down Deep to collect paper for their next project that amounts to less than what's in the handful of books that are sitting on the desk inside the legacy. In the last couple of episodes, we've been reminded of what a big revelation the cameras were when we saw portraits in different situations that were all painted by hand. Lucas was just greeted by an AI assistant. Then he was handed a voice-activated tablet that contained the whole of human history, knowledge, and art to hear Bernard describe it. There's just one catch. I mean, besides the one where you might find yourself eliminated if your boss no longer needs your assistance, the God Mode tablet can tell you that the silo has been around for 352 years, but not why it was built or why the people inside are living there now the way they do. Before we can get much of a look at what's collected inside the vault, the computer voice tells Bernard there's a Delta event happening in the central shaft. While Shirley was collecting paper, Knox collected gunpowder. But don't worry, it's not for a bomb. Instead, they built a rocket and filled it with what is essentially propaganda. Questions about the cleaning, what happened to Judge Meadows, and the catchy reminder Juliette lives. When Billings asked what they were thinking, Knox said they just wanted to send a message, which seemed to work. When Bernard gathers the people who work for the sheriff's department to present the new Billings has been kidnapped and forced to lie conspiracy, Sandy brings the notes up. Even more effective than that is that they followed up the ticker tape spectacle by turning the generators off. This sent a fearful reminder that that's a thing they can do, but it also had the unintended consequences of casting more suspicion on IT, which you'll remember Solo saying has its own external power source and didn't go dark when the rest of the silo did. This and the decision to black out pretty much all comms in the silo led to the new cover story, which I think it's worth mentioning is far less effective than the story about the new tape at the beginning of the season. Can't say the same about turning off the power, though. From Breakfast at the Sims household, we see that it freaked their son out enough that Rob gave him the Pez dispenser relic with a fake backstory to make him feel better. Camille points out that people aren't just scared, they're impressed. The rocket was dramatic and it got them asking questions. Rob sees it as an opportunity. In his mind, it shows Admonson isn't up for the job. And if they tell Bernard that the Raiders only survived on the stairs because Camille intervened, that will get him back to where he wants to be. While this sounds like a good idea to him, it doesn't really work for Camille since Bernard already knows about what happened. And worse, he knows she did it behind her husband's back. So she tries to play it off, like going to him now would be more of a favor, while if he waits for Bernard to come to him, then he'd be doing business. In discussing relative effectiveness concerning the core cast, does anyone else think Walker feels like she's in a weird place in this episode? At the beginning of the season, she was set up to be the voice of experience and reason while temperatures were rising and mechanical. She does play a major role in the rocket op, but for the rest of the episode, she sort of bounces around worrying about Carla. This is warranted after she finds out about judicial seclusion, which we get a glimpse of when Bernard visits her. It doesn't look like Carla has it as bad as Patrick Kennedy, but she is locked up alone blindfolded. He wants to know about the gunpowder, so she tries to negotiate for information about the rest of the gang, but he simply refuses to do that before leaving her there. For Walk, though, I'm slightly surprised at the turn she's taking, even though it makes sense. At the end of the episode, you can understand why she reconnects the camera after communication with the rest of the silo was cut off. But what exactly would she be able to negotiate with in exchange for Carla's safety? Bernard has the same question when he hears about it from Amundsen. Why would she do that? The new head of security gets a much needed win by telling his boss they used to be married. And Bernard realizes that his prisoner is essentially a hostage that someone close to the center of power down deep cares about. You'd hate to think of Walker selling out her comrades for a personal issue, but she also spends most of the episode saying she lost Carla the first time because she didn't do enough. Silo 18 has two other major developments in this episode. While Knox and Shirley debate who kissed who, Billings and Hank continue their investigation, eventually leading them to take these two into custody for their own safety. They questioned a whisperer who gave us some much needed insights into how that whole network functions, and they learned that there's a place in the scavenger's room where someone from Judicial leaves notes for the down deepers who pass along information. The last note that came down was an order to kill Knox and Shirley. Hank goes to see Patrick Kennedy's niece, Frances, to ask who might be working as a rat for the up top. She basically tells him to get lost, but when they return to the station, they get news of trouble in the cafeteria. Maeve, the woman who showed them the rat poison on the food in the last episode, is waving around a knife to keep an angry mob at bay. They're shouting and accusing her of being the poisoner before Hank figures out what's happening. It turns out her mother has been sick and now she's in medical above the barricades. So they're able to threaten her and she has to do what Judicial wants so that nothing bad happens to her mother. It highlights the reach they have and how they can exploit pressure points to turn the residents against each other. In the end, Hank points out that she made sure no one got hurt, and Knox gets the opportunity to give a rallying speech to bring everyone back together. The second development is about just how much Bernard doesn't want to get back together with Sims. If the last couple of episodes have shown us anything about him, he's a man who doesn't like being sidelined. Rob ignores his wife's advice and forces Bernard to come see him over the warrant to search supply. This sets up a showdown where both make equally satisfying jabs at each other. Really. Bernard is rightfully pissed that Sims forced him to kill a woman he cared about, and Rob is justifiably upset that Bernie took 10 years of his life only to exile him to a position where he's a glorified rubber stamp wielder. He can't believe he was overlooked as his shadow and points out that choosing Lucas is a sign that he's running out of allies and maybe more importantly, running out of moves. Bernard fires back that while Camille's actions at the standoff may have saved Raiders' lives, she also helped Knox and Shirley get away, so it's kind of a wash. Finding this out this way hits Rob hard, and while it's not the kind of exchange someone can win, any hope of these two teaming up seems lost. The correct observation Sims makes about the head of IT's current situation go back to the question posed when he first showed Lucas the legacy. He prioritizes deciphering the code because he knows nothing about it, and its unknowable nature means it could be potentially more dangerous than the rebellion. He leaves out the part about being obsessed because of how Meadows introduced things on her way out. But with everything else falling apart, his new shadow seems up to the task. By the end of the episode, Lucas has used his new resources to determine that it's a book cipher. Quinn used numbers to correspond with words on a specific page in a book. He has reason to believe it's page 77, but there weren't any matches in the legacy. But he says not using a book from the archive makes sense since he wanted his code solved. He needs to find a book that's out in the silo, so a relic that's over 140 years old. Bernard starts putting things together in his head, saying he knows one person in the silo who might have a relic like that, and then he gives him Judge Meadows' copy of The Wizard of Oz, which he had in his desk drawer. That seems big. In short order, Lucas is ready to discover what made Meadows leave the position he just took 25 years ago. And he's still wearing his clothes from the mines. Elsewhere, Sims heads home to sit down with Camille after realizing what she tried to do to him at breakfast. She already knows when she sees him and tries to justify keeping him in the dark about helping Shirley and Knox. She went behind his back, but it was an effort to protect him. Trying to get back on Bernard's right side is a good idea, but making friends also makes sense, and Bernard would find out either way. This was just her way of making Bernard think he wasn't involved with those two getting away. He makes the point that the rebels are dangerous while she counters, so is Bernard, but the unspoken part here is that he was complicit in framing them for the judge's death. She's not wrong that they don't know how this will end, and playing both sides until the winner emerges could be a smart move. However, whether she helped them or not, would they really overlook what Rob did as the head of security? For now, he's more concerned that she tried to make a move without him, and I guess that makes sense. But even after that, getting everything out in the open and seeming to be on the same page, I'd be watching her if I were him. I started this video by trying to imagine what it would be like to be in Lucas's shoes at the beginning of this episode when he first sees the legacy. Now try to put yourself in Juliette's. You wake up in a strange place with this still very strange man holding the newfound helmet you need to complete your suit hostage. On the one hand, he saved your life. It has lots of amusing anecdotes like, hey, in the before times, they used to do this thing called swimming where they would pull with their arms and kick with their legs to move through the water just like a fish. Except fish don't have arms and legs. And while the facts and stories are probably annoying, he is using some of the knowledge he gleaned from living inside the legacy to make himself useful in this episode. On the other hand, he's volatile and prone to mini breakdowns that pop up when he's stressed or fears things might not go his way. Then there's the previously mentioned withholding of the suit, which in your mind is putting his needs ahead of the 10,000 people whose lives you feel responsible for in Silo 18. And no matter how much reason you apply to the problem, he just won't give you what you want before you do him this solid. Even if he's coming from a wrong place, his points aren't without merit, and he's probably right to fear a low probability of you returning after you leave. But this is a classic trolley problem that isn't hard to decide for anyone other than him. Now imagine the pump you need to restart to be done with him is 8 levels underwater. And you have to tolerate this guy while you put everything together to solve the problem. Since reasoning didn't work, you take a hostile stance, which only seems to increase his attempts to win you over. When tensions reach a boiling point, you call him out on his shit. He isn't the head of IT. He's not even the Shadow. Hell, he isn't even Solo. In the face of these very true statements, his response is to whine. I'm not sure what else to call it. You could feel bad for him based on his situation and how he feels about things, but what does any of it even mean at this point in this place? What does keeping him from ruining everything look like when all is said and done and you walk out of the airlock? Still, you have no choice, so you engineer your way through it. You face your debilitating fear of water and make your way 8 levels down. Things seem to be going well. The rig you put together is moving you into place. The goggles Solo made help you see, while the improvised pump gets you the air you need to breathe. You make your way to the submerged pump and attach all that waterproof cable you found and hauled down there with you. Send the signal and see it start up underwater like you hoped it would. Things in Silo 17 finally seem to be working in a way that you might put it in the rearview mirror by the end of the day. Now imagine you make it back to your rig and pull the string to ring the bell, and the whole thing just falls straight down at the same time you realize you're not getting air anymore. You start to swim, or whatever your terrified mind decides to do at this point as you try to work your way back up to the surface. If you survive and get over the incredible fear you're feeling at this moment, you're going to be so mad at this imposter clown who walked away and ran back to the vault because he thought he left it unlocked again. Then you get to the top, make your way out of the water, and as you guessed, he's not there, but you also see a hatchet on the ground. Was he using one of those for something? It's hard to remember. And then you find a trail of blood leading away from where he was stationed. And what would that even mean? We'll have to wait until next week to find out for sure, but they close the episode with one of those shots from a distance that they've been peppering in every episode while Juliette has been rummaging around. The ones that make you think someone may be watching. Things picked up exactly where they had left off this week, with her looking at the blood on the stairs. There is an arrow, which is the exact weapon that pretty much guarantees that Solo's injuries weren't self-inflicted, so she knows there's someone else in the silo. They've been telegraphing this since the first episode, when her rope was definitely cut by someone, and through the wider shots where it looks like someone is watching her from a distance. It's not subtle at all once you know, which means this is a big relief to me since I knew this was the case after reading the book and never wanted to spoil things. In this episode, I wasn't initially sure what was happening with her as she tried to track them down. Solo mentioned the bends and how to cure them in the last episode, but not knowing much more about them, I just assume this is something that hits you right away, like before you come out of the water. It turns out that's not the case, or at least not in my expanded understanding after reading the first webpage that came up when I searched for it. The symptoms from decompression sickness can manifest within minutes of surfacing, but in most patients, the symptoms come on gradually within an hour. When I went back to watch it again, the sound design was pretty great, having the ringing in her ears mixed with the underwater sounds. When you think about it, it's not just Jules being a badass powering through another situation again. It also makes the point that even though he's a bit much and possibly indefinitely indisposed, Solo knows a lot, and if you could cut through whatever's going on with him, some of it would probably be useful. His advice to go back down about 20 feet and wait until you feel better certainly was, and it sets up a particularly nice looking shot of her submerged with the staircase in the background as she takes hits off her air hose. With the symptoms sorted, she heads back up, which is crazy no matter how you look at it, but it's also her only choice if she wants to get her suit back and leave. There were some scary noises, but what I kept thinking about was their weapon. Imagine moving forward and how difficult that would be knowing that an arrow might cut through the dark and drop you at any moment. The IT offices in the vault are on level 19, and when Jules makes it to level 12, she gets the spotlight treatment from someone who tells her that they killed Solo and will do the same to her if she doesn't go away. One of my favorite details about this episode is that she doesn't come off as very worried about Solo or even who these people are. She just wants the suit and wants to get out of there. But her tone changes a little bit when they say they killed him. Even then, it doesn't really add up, considering how things looked when she came out of the water. Either way, she continues to press. Her requests to see him so that she can find out where he hid the suit are denied, and when she keeps going and keeps asking, she gets one of those arrows in her shoulder, so ouch. In typical Jules fashion, she dresses the wound herself and then goes right back to searching. This time she brings a shield along, and when she makes it to the landing on level 12, she sees what looks like Solo's dead body, which turns out to be one of this new group playing possum as a trap. She overpowers them and gets their raider helmet off, and it turns out to be what looks like a teenage girl. Before she can figure out what to make of that, the guy who faced off with her the last time she came up and the person who shot her with the arrow come down, and she threatens to put one in her heart this time if she makes a move. It's Silo's 17, so it's dark, and we don't get a great look at them. They could be teenagers or young adults, but I don't think they look like they're in their mid-20s yet. We know the rebellion occurred at least 25 years ago, so their presence brings up a lot of questions we'll have to wait until next week to get some answers to. Solo had a healthy fear of outside of the vault, but it's hard to say if he knew for sure that this group existed. While he didn't want to talk about the bodies outside his door, I don't think you could say for sure if these are the people who wrote the messages outside or if they're all connected. This idea that Solo never really left the vault or never went that far from it is a slight change that the show made. So I really don't know for sure if this is going to be the same as it was or not. But I will say that there's probably a lot of details you could pick up on now that you know this if you go back and look at some of those scenes whenever she first approaches the vault and she's just sort of working in that area around it. Season 2 has had a significant focus on access to information, and there are major steps forward in that department in Silo 18. Lucas makes the most interesting discoveries, which I'll come back to, and the other part of the story ends with Walker seemingly turning on mechanical, or at least picking Carla's well-being over the rebellion. There are some character developments in 18 as well, but it still felt a little like the show was spinning its wheels in the lead up to the finale. The first one of these will take on a new context after Lucas learns more about Salvador Quinn. In the first shot that takes place in the Down Deep, we see Shirley adding Cooper's name to the wall under the silo. She started the season out for blood in the wake of Juliette's cleaning, but after this quiet moment, we see that she's considering options that don't include violence. Sheriff Billings is in a position where he doesn't fit on either side of the division. So when we see him in the cafeteria, he's just sitting there alone, with the other mechanicals avoiding him, and Shirley decides to sit down and have a conversation. After some back and forth about his uncertain status, which has him essentially hiding out down there, she asks him to help their side. He's still only willing to go as far as the pact allows, insisting it's all they have and it's the words that they have to live by, while she asks if he ever considered that the founders lied about everything. She points out that justice is unattainable given the current state of affairs with Bernard as mayor and Sims as judge. Her question is simple if not effective. What would the pact say about killing someone so that you could pin it on someone else to fuel division? The ineffectiveness of this comes from Paul's insistence on having proof to show what really happened, something that Bernard will never have to give up given his grip on the information ecosystem in the silo. Conflict has been building for the sheriff all season, but you still understand why he can't get fully behind the idea of rebellion yet. It will still take some convincing to change his worldview, which is so entwined with his need to believe in the pact. It's not the only thing he has going on in this episode either. His wife visits Patrick Kennedy to check up on his recovery and give him some food, and he lets it slip that Paul showed him the page from the travel guide. She pretends she saw it too, which just adds to the sadness of her being left out, and when she sees her husband next, she demands to see it for herself. To his credit, he has a good reason for showing it to Kennedy and not her. Or at least he never intended to show it to anyone, but the situation to win Patrick over and gain his trust presented itself, so he used what was available. When she does see it, her reaction is similar to his when he first saw it. It's so foreign to the existence they've had growing up in the silo that it calls everything she believes into question. The experience brings them closer together, but her question is one neither one of them can answer. What happened to bring something like that to an end? Up top, Rob is in a similar situation with his spouse. After not getting anywhere with Admonson when he goes to ask him for info about Lucas, and is reminded that he never answered to Judge Meadows when he was the head of security, he's pretty pumped up when he gets a message to meet in the apple orchards. He wanted to know what Lucas was up to, and his replacement provided that, at least what he knows, which doesn't amount to much beyond his movements and that he's looking for a book. But he also tells him to get his wife to leave him alone. Earlier, Camille went to see Admonson to get him to help her husband. While this is not the same as assisting Shirley and Knox in their escape and not telling him, it is another situation in which she makes her own moves instead of working with him, which is something they agreed to do in the last episode. There's a shot where Sims is just standing there alone in the orchard after he leaves. That really sums up the character's situation in the last couple of episodes. In another scene, Bernard rushes down the staircase, paralleling Juliette, who is working her way up. We'll find out he's reacting to the news about Walker turning her camera back on now that he knows she was married to Carla. He disables a pump as a pretense to send her a service call for a repair on level 90. Shirley tries to talk her out of going, but Walker says she's been guaranteed safe passage, and even if it turns out to be a trap, which is what Shirley thinks, and it obviously looks like it might be, she doesn't care because maybe they just lock her up with Carla anyway. Bernard is waiting for her when she gets there and says he was hoping for a chance to negotiate. This is a funny term when one side has control over the entire silo and can order torture on the other side's ex-wife, promising that she won't die, but she'll be pleading to the founders to let that happen. All Walker has is Mechanical's trust, and to betray that would be to betray everything else that matters to her. Bernard tells her that he believes Mechanical's actions will kill them all and that Carla's life is in her hands. If she told him what the rebels were up to in advance, he might be able to restore normalcy. In a choice like this, it doesn't even really matter if he's lying. It just comes down to what she's willing to do to save Carla. When she agrees to help him, he tells her to take solace in the 10,000 lives she's potentially saving. Since we know the character, we know this is precisely what she rallied against when talking to the rebels when she first got involved in the second episode. For now, she's forced to choke it down, and tells him to make good on his promise to let her see his prisoner. As with most things, the deal doesn't turn out to be exactly what she had in mind. Rather than getting to visit with Carla, he lets her look through the door to where she's being held. Her ex, who she sees doesn't look good, isn't even aware that she's there. He lets her see that she's alive, and if she wants her to stay that way, she has to continue to be his eyes in the down deep. After getting this far, there isn't anything else she can do. He warns her that he has ways to make sure she keeps up her end of the bargain. He'll need her to turn her camera back on and not leave her workshop until this is over. And if you were thinking maybe she could game the situation and string him along without giving up anything important, we see that their cooperation leads to immediate consequences. Earlier in the episode, the rebels met with her with a plan to break into supply. Since the barricade went up, they haven't been able to restock and are running out of everything, basically. She was opposed to the plan at the time because she thought the focus should be more on freeing Carla. Things even ended on bad terms with her sending them away, but not before she got the details of how they plan to do it. When they put their plan into action and make their way up, they find Admonson and a group of raiders waiting for them, and they all get caught. Later, when Shirley comes to tell Walker about it, it's obvious that someone is feeding IT and judicial information, but at least for now, no one would ever expect it was Walk. With the camera back on, Bernard is able to watch this conversation play out, and after his new informant flips him off, he gets a smug look on his face that says he feels like things are shifting back in his direction. The thing about Bernard is that you can't trust anything he says, and I think they've established that Walker is a pretty sharp character. This feels like a turn that will end with redemption, and while I buy that she's doing this because letting Carla suffer is too difficult, I wouldn't be surprised if she finds a way to make Bernard sorry he ever messed with them in the first place. His general untrustworthiness adds an additional layer to Lucas's story. At the beginning of the episode, we see that he finally has a change of clothes when he shows up at Judge Meadows' old place and finds the door open. Sims sent some guys there to pack everything up, which led to conflicting orders. Mayor Holland sent him, the judge sent them, and Lucas almost seems surprised when he realizes his new status means he can send them away. It pumps him up a bit when they see his blue badge, and after he comes up empty looking through Judge Meadows' books, he gets the idea to look up Salvador Quinn's descendants, which he can now also access because of this new ID. This leads him to the front door of a woman who clearly doesn't want to talk to him. Her family makes the wool for the cleanings and isn't receptive to his inquiries about their ancestor Salvador Quinn. Once he gets in, they'll explain that his name brought the family nothing but shame and dishonor. They swear they don't have a book or anything else that belongs to him, and sensing their reluctance, Lucas gives them some time to talk, saying he's going out for a coffee. He threatens them with a search, which I mean they lied to him a couple of times before they let him in the door, so I guess he feels like he's stepping into this new role he's been given. The father-in-law catches up with them outside and calls him out for trying to be a tough guy. He explains they lost the name and still make the wool for the cleanings because even 140 years later, they're still trying to make up for being related to the man who almost destroyed the silo. That's the story they know and everyone else grew up with, but when Lucas returns to Bernard's office, he tells him the story isn't true. They've been taught that he let the rebels erase the servers and burn the books when the real story, according to Bernard, is that he saved the silo. Before him, rebellions were common, which lines up with all the names on the wall below the silo. They happened every 20 years or so and could have all led to catastrophic failure. Salvador realized that the rebellion being part of the shared history was part of the problem and decided to sever the silo from its history. He cut off access to the servers, got rid of all the books, and blamed the rebels. Then he put the drug that makes people forget in the water so that they did over time, which lines up with why no one remembers why all those names below the silo are there. It was a radical plan and one Bernard thinks was worth doing since it led to 140 years of peace. Of course, it's hard to know for sure if this is true because how can we believe anything Bernard tells anyone? How can we be sure that this isn't something he believes because that's what he was taught? But then we'll find out later it was just part of a larger deception put together by the founders. We can't, but the real revelation here is that when Lucas goes back to apologize and delivers the news that Quinn was actually a hero, they've already heard this. Judge Meadows said the exact same thing when she visited them 25 years ago. So if she was on the right track, then he is as well, and they tell him what she came looking for, and more importantly, what they gave her before she left, saying they never saw her again after that. Salvador's old copy of the pact, which he finds out is still in her apartment when he returns. It takes a while and some clues inside the book before he starts putting things together, and we only see the very beginning of what he's decoding. That reads, "If you've gotten this far, you already know the game is rigged." On his way out, he runs into Sims, who isn't as easily impressed with his blue badge as the others he ran into. He looks through his bag and sees that he's leaving with a copy of the pact, which doesn't really send up any red flags. Lucas does a good enough job of playing it off, and there isn't much Rob can do, but he does give the new shadow for the head of IT some solid advice. He's not sure what Bernard was thinking about in giving him that position, but he does know that once he gets what he needs from him, he'll send him back to the mines. This is a pretty uncontroversial opinion, and the judge adds that Lucas might find himself in a position where he needs a friend. Bernard will always be 4 moves ahead, and I guess that makes sense from Rob's point of view, but it's hard to say if his old boss is still on the same trajectory he was on before everything started to fall apart. Being careful is still solid advice, and Sims brings up Lucas's mother to keep things from feeling too affable. In the penultimate episode of Silo's first season, Juliette watched a video recording that George Wilkins left for her before he died. In that, he revealed that he found a door below the silo. And in what almost played like a throwaway line, he mentioned he knew she would be wondering about the water down there, and says it turned out to be nothing to worry about. This connects back to the scene that closed the second episode of the series, where we learned about her fear of water when she wasn't able to follow the path he laid out for her. If only she had seen the video and had all the information. It would have saved her a couple of seasons of beating herself up in George's absence because she felt like she let him down. It also may have prevented her from being sent outside and everything that came after that. When he encountered the water, Lucas Kyle didn't need to know what was in the video because he was able to surmise that the water couldn't be that deep. There must be some unknown pump put in place, or maybe even still being monitored by someone outside of the silo, or else the whole lower area would be flooded by now. Cheryl asks if he's sure about that because he'd be putting his life on the line. And for where he's at in his story, that doesn't really matter. He explains what's motivating him when he visits his mother earlier in the episode. You'll remember that when Juliette asked for his help with the hard drive last season, he said he couldn't do it because he was the only one taking care of his mom. We find out that this was news to her in a pretty funny scene because he doesn't, and therein lies the point. He lied to Juliette because he was afraid to get involved because he didn't want to get in trouble. It's been haunting him ever since, and I should add that his further inaction of not turning her in got him sent to the mines anyway. So now he's determined to not make that same mistake again. All of this setup made for a truly memorable reveal when he finally lets go of the rope to fall into water that only turns out to be waist deep. I'll come back to what happens after that, but I wanted to start here because I think it's worth pointing out that the creators planted a seed 17 episodes ago, added another layer at exactly this point last season, connected another main character from this season to that same mystery, and then paid it all off in a pretty satisfying way here. With only one episode left to go in its second season, it's the kind of thing you like to see. It makes for the best episode this season, even as it sets up another mystery in its title, The Safeguard. There are plenty of answers and payoffs to go around, and what appears to be the conclusion for Jules' time in Silo 17. We fast forward through that again, only this time we see the events through the new characters' perspectives. Silo 17's other inhabitants aren't exactly survivors of the rebellion. They're children of survivors who were only kids or babies themselves during that time. Knowing Solo's backstory from reading the book made this a little harder to talk about without giving away that he was also a child when that happened. But knowing that Steve Zahn is in his late 50s and that we only vaguely knew it happened at least 25 years ago might have clued you into the fact that the trio we saw at the end of the last episode have never known anything but a life in a destroyed silo. As you might imagine, that's had an effect on them. The extent that it shaped them starts to become clear when we realize they call Solo the killer. Sure, he's been kind of weird and prone to throwing tantrums, but a killer? There must be more to that story, right? There is, but because of the way things played out, Audrey, Rick, and Eater, whose real name we still don't know, and Benny, and the baby, there's a baby, the only thing they really know about Solo, or Jimmy if you prefer, is that he killed their parents. As we go through things again and they watch Juliette arrive, we see them do things we know they did, like Audrey cutting the rope, but also things like Rick saving her by throwing the plastic container she's able to grab hold of when she surfaces into the water. From their point of view, they have a legitimate reason to go after Solo, and all the goodies he has locked away with him in the vault. Audrey is essentially the leader and pushes more toward violent solutions, but Rick often undermines her by looking for other ways to get the things they need. Then there's Eater, who we saw set up the fake Solo ambush last week. There's no way to sugarcoat it, they treat her badly. And we eventually find out it's because after her mother died, their parents took her in, and that extra mouth to feed was part of the reason they were so desperately trying to get into the vault. They were starving and needed food for their children. While Jules is sympathetic to their stories, I mean, how could you not be? Audrey has complicated things by giving her an impossible time frame to get into the vault, or promises she'll finally kill Solo. Jules can't abide that initially because she needs to find out what he did with her suit. So she has this impossible task to do something no one else has been able to do in the past couple of decades by the time Audrey's baby is ready to feed again. In my earlier videos, I mentioned there was a lot going on in the background of the 17 scenes that I thought would take on new meaning once everything was revealed. So it was fun watching Juliette put those things together. The numbers on the chalkboard turned out to be a big one. They were the way Chase and Tess kept track of the ones they tried before they eventually got in. They figured this out when they went to Russell's apartment, where Juliette learns he has a son and also finds his suit, the one every head of IT has. Bernard mentioned the one he has earlier in the season when talking to Judge Meadows. And it's at this point that Juliette could have just grabbed that and ditched Eater and left if she really wanted to. She decides not to, and when they return to the classroom where she saw the numbers, she realizes they eventually got into the vault. Otherwise, Solo wouldn't have killed them. And she erased the correct code they used while working on her plan. She thinks she can figure it out, but there isn't much time. As she works, Eater has a minute to look around and wants to know why everyone has two names. She says her mom only gave her one, but Jules is too distracted to ask what it is. She's narrowed the list down to 6 code combinations, and she gets 3 tries per day. When they get to the vault, she tries the first 2, and that leaves her with one last attempt to put in the correct code. The name Solo comes up, and she starts to wonder who this guy she spent most of the season with is if he's not Solo. She remembers the strange conversation in the classroom and realizes the story about the girl he remembered was real. He wasn't very convincing when he lied about it, but she's just now starting to put it together. That means that when the rebellion happened, he was just a kid. And when she went back to the classroom to check, she found out his full name was Jimmy Conroy, and he was Russell's kid. Of course, if you roll back the tape in your head, this means he was talking about himself giving the real Solo his nickname when he told that story. And like the opening sequence where we see everything from the other perspective, it recontextualizes everything that happened in Silo 17 this season. Rather than gamble on her last attempt, she decides to use this new information to convince Solo to help. She manages to get Rick to let her in after Eater returns the bracelet she retrieved from his mother's body. Jimmy is in lousy shape and says that he failed. At first he assumes Juliette got in and is a little surprised she's there when he finds out she didn't. She explains she knows he's not Russell's shadow, he's his son. At about the same time, Audrey returns and wants to kill him because that's pretty much what she does, but Rick wants to hear his side of the story. Then the talk turns to Chase and Tess getting in, and we find out it happened while he was asleep. He left his gun by the door, they found it there, and used it to shoot him. The kids don't want to believe him, and things get tougher when he explains that he broke off the inside handle and closed the door after they got into the food vault. They couldn't get out because it was sealed, and Jimmy confirms Rick's suspicions that he left them to suffocate to death by not answering when he asks. Now Audrey really wants to kill him, but has to accept he's telling the truth when Juliette convinces him to show them the scar from his gunshot wound. Throughout this whole exchange, Juliette does a surprisingly good job of finding the right tone to approach these sensitive topics. She uses everything she learned about this preteen trapped in a grown man's body who has spent decades in isolation, and this new group of kids who didn't have it easy growing up either. As her time in Silo 17 ends, it's evident that it changed her, as did her time with Jimmy Conroy, who ultimately turns out to be a young boy just trying to do the last thing his father told him to. The final piece of his tragic story comes to light when he talks about that. He says he doesn't want to be remembered as Jimmy because he was a coward. He hid behind the door that Solo protected all these years, even when the sheriff held a gun to his father's head. We see how that played out in a flashback that answers one of the questions the one in the opening episode left us with. When the sheriff and his wife were talking after they stormed IT, he said his hand slipped. He didn't mean to. All while his wife is cleaning up his face. We now know that he brought Russell up to the door at gunpoint to try to force Jimmy to open the vault, and ended up accidentally shooting him in the face, killing him in front of his son. This gets a lot of feelings going around and even manages to break through Audrey's defenses. After Jules helps Solo see that his father wasn't trying to save the vault, he was trying to save his son, he starts to forgive himself. And when he finds out that Audrey and Rick have a baby that they're trying to protect, he decides to let them in. I probably don't need to say that Steve Zahn and Rebecca Ferguson nailed this, but I will because it's that good. I've been waiting all season to see what Solo's vault looks like compared to Bernard's, and there were no disappointments there either. Man, what song would you choose to play for a bunch of people who never heard music? I guess Monster Mash works since they're kids, but hopefully he'll expand their horizons soon. This episode had me by the time Solo started to come around and suggested they all try ice cream for the first time. But then it buried me when Jimmy realized that Juliette could have left when she found the suit but stayed there for him. Of course, this wouldn't work nearly as well without all the scenes they shared along the way, but the choice to have him show his appreciation with a simple hand on the shoulder really put it over the top. That's where things end in that silo, and while the journey there was frustrating at times, I think it came together really well in the end. It would be hard for Silo 18 to top that, and most of what happens there doesn't, but it does get us closer to a season-ending conflict, and that ending I mentioned at the beginning is pretty good. I was a little surprised that Bernard took a back seat, or at least stayed in a seat watching the camera on Walker's apartment for most of the episode. Tim Robbins still managed to deliver some quality face acting as things played out, and I guess it makes sense since his being unavailable when Lucas goes looking for him has his shadow going to the down deep on his own. They share one scene before that happens where he corrects the idea that the founders built 50 silos. He tells them technically there are 51 without elaborating any further, and just saying he doesn't know when Lucas asks him why they were built in the first place. The key piece of information he passes along is that Juliette was alive and made it to another silo before the camera in her helmet cut out. He adds that all IT heads in their shadows know about the other silos and tells him to continue working to find out what Quinn was really trying to say with his coded message. Then he goes to sit and watch his walk cam. He sees Knox come in and finds out what Billings is up to. Paul and his wife discuss the page from the travel guide again and decide they deserve to know the truth about what happened outside. The conversation she has with Patrick Kennedy later also adds to this. For one of its truest adherents, the influence of the pact is starting to fade. Paul pledges to help the Mechanicals, but doesn't have much to offer after publicly calling out Bernard and Sims. They realize they might be able to call on Camille again, though. She did save Knox and Shirley on their way back down, but it wouldn't be easy to contact her. It's here that the sheriff makes himself useful. He passes along a message to her husband with a report about a relic and gives him the page when he arrives at the barricades. He tells him that he believes Camille might care more about the silo than anything else and believes Rob might get on board when he sees the page. When he looks at it with Camille, they wonder if things might be all right outside and decide if they are, they owe it to their son to help the Mechanicals. There's a lot that isn't completely clear here. Primarily what Paul asked Rob to do. But if the rebels end up toppling Bernard, what sense would it make to stick with him after he cast Rob aside? He mentions the Down Deep would never accept him, and she agrees to do what she can. Then he does mention he has this other thing, Bernard's key fob with the 18 on it that lights up, and tells her how Bernard goes to the server room when things go sideways. I found it pretty surprising that they didn't know about the vault, but I guess that makes sense, and really adds to Bernard's sense of isolation if you think about it. As his support wanes, Bernard meets with the deputies and other members of the sheriff's department to try to feed them a story about their boss, who he says is the ringleader of a plan to blow the airlock with gunpowder. It's a tough sell, as is his request to have them build a temporary holding cell in the cafeteria up top. So I suppose we'll see how that goes over next week. Then we see Knox have an epiphany, saying that he figured out who the snitch was before he went to see Walker. And I don't know. There's a lot about this part I wasn't sure how we were supposed to take. He opens by saying he knows who is helping IT and Judicial. Everything about the way he looks at Walk and delivers this makes it sound like he thinks it's her. Of course, we're thinking there's going to be this reveal that he has figured it out it's her, so I don't know if that's influencing it. But then he says it's Teddy's mom, and they both agree they could understand why she would do it, trying to protect her son. When he was there before, he asked a lot of questions about her not being able to leave, and knows she just went up through the barricades after getting a message while all other communications were shut down. But I'll be interested to see if I'm reading too much into this. He either screwed them by giving up their plan or did a pretty solid job of feeding them a fake one, which based on Bernard's reaction worked, as he couldn't look more pleased at feeling like he was one step ahead. That brings us back to Lucas, who continued to decode. We saw the first part of the message last week. If you made it this far, you already know the game is rigged. He took the second part to Bernard. We think we're the chosen ones, but we're really just one of many. The founders didn't build a single silo, they built 50. The next line reads, and they created the safeguard, which sounds ominous when we first see it, and even more so when he hears it at the door at the end. The next time we see the page, we can't be sure how much is left out, but the final lines we get a look at before he leaves say, reason be damned, if you don't believe me, go to the very bottom of the silo. Find the tunnel, you'll get confirmation there. After that, he starts his journey down, gets his mother to agree to hold on to Salvador's version of the pact, tries to find Bernard but can't, and almost gets sent back up when he reaches the barricade before he convinces them he knows Juliette. When Shirley arrives, she's still unconvinced, but he gets her help by saying Jules might still be alive. They bond some down in George's lair over what a unique person Juliette is and how they all wish they could have done more to help her. He seems to win her over as much as that's possible in this situation, and as I mentioned, explains why he doesn't think he'll die when he makes his way to the water. In case he does, he tells her what Bernard told him about the helmet camera footage, but leaves out the part about the other 50 silos. I still laugh to myself in my head when I think about him falling into the water, but the tone quickly shifts when he approaches the door. He's met by a disembodied voice that the subtitles call the algorithm, and it knows his name. I went back to check episode 7 when he first entered the vault, and there's no reference to the algorithm when he introduces himself. But the voice in both cases sounds like a pretty generic AI one, so it's hard to tell. This one wants to know why he's at the door under the silo, and after he explains he was following Salvador Quinn's instructions, it tells him he's only the fourth person to make their way there. Before him, it was just George, Judge Meadows, and Salvador. The algorithm didn't talk to George, but he gave the other two the same directive he's about to give Lucas. There's also a warning. If he tells anyone about their conversation or what he's seen down there, they'll have no choice but to initiate the safeguard. He checks to ensure he knows what that is, and even though we never saw him find anything other than the name, he says he does, and then it cuts to black and the episode ends. Earlier in the season, I mentioned that they were setting Pete Nichols up for something, not considering it might play out like this. Knox and Shirley go to see him with the news from Lucas that his daughter might still be alive. They say they need his help, and when he asks what could be more important than what he's already doing as a doctor, the answer is war. For much of this season, the silo has been on the brink of that, but if you look back, it's mostly been avoided by one side outmaneuvering the other. In the last couple of episodes, Bernard thinks he could snuff out the rebellion once and for all by turning Walk into his snitch due to her love for Carla. He had the upper hand with her ex-wife locked away and unfettered access to everything that happened in her workshop through the camera surveillance. All he had to do was wait for the rebels to reveal their plans, and early in the finale, they appear to do just that. The rebels somehow working together with Walk to deceive Bernard with something I thought might be happening, but I couldn't say for sure. That made this work really well, as did the previous heist-style capers from earlier episodes. The mechanicals make Bernard believe that the plan is to rig the generator to blow, and that they're geared up for a face-off at the barricade that would last long enough to get that ready. Thinking he has the drop on them, Bernard makes the fatal mistake of sending all the raiders down to crush them at the barricades. It looks like a decisive victory. Everyone important is taken into custody and brought up the stairs, and the raiders secure the generator. This leads Rob and Camille to worry that they picked the wrong side, but we also find out they delivered Billings' message. We still don't know what that means, but we know the deputies arrested the former sheriff after Bernard accused him of being a traitor. When Odmondson brings the rebels into the cell up top, he outs Walker as the snitch, thinking that he's betraying her in front of all of her comrades. When she asks to see Bernard, Carla says she hopes he sends her outside because she's not in on it at all and really does think that she's been betrayed. The thing about the split season is that keeping Juliette stuck for so long made us think she'd probably be right, and that if she didn't get back, Silo 18 would collapse like 17 did. So when Walk gets in front of Bernard and says she wants to tell him a story, it really feels like something should happen. She explains that they have a sign language in mechanical from constantly having to work together around the noisy generator. They used that to have an entirely different conversation while he thought he was intercepting their plans. While she's delivering him the bad news, she starts watching the clock timing things out. This is all cut with what Pete is doing on the stairs after agreeing to help Shirley and Knox. He has Hank pretend to be an injured raider who needs immediate medical attention that he can't get below the barricade. He manages to make his way past, but we see something fall off the stretcher as they're leaving. By the time Walk is queuing up her big reveal, we find out they're carrying a bomb, and the plan is to blow the stairs. A plan that can no longer happen unless someone manually triggers the explosives. Bernard's reaction is fantastic when her countdown reaches 0 and nothing happens. He taunts Walk, saying that was dramatic, and does the equivalent of an end zone dance while celebrating her failure. At the same time, Pete removes the watch and tells Hank to return it to Juliette with a heartfelt message about her being perfect her whole life. Hank tries to get him to let him take his place, but absolutely not. And then Pete sets off the bomb, which ends his life. It also destroys the stairs between levels 90 and 92 and traps all the raiders below that, effectively winning the conflict for the rebels, who are now up top and backed up by all the deputies that Paul was able to bring over to their side with his message. There were several moments wrapped up in this. Pete's final words and sacrifice, Bernard's hubris that immediately blows up in his face, and Walker getting to celebrate after everything looked so bleak when the bomb didn't go off initially. They all landed and felt right, but then you start to wonder how it could end there. The answer is it doesn't. And this isn't even the worst thing that happens to Bernard on this day. Lucas has been making his way back from below the silo, where he found the door and received a message from what the show is calling the algorithm. After clearing some hurdles along the way, he finds Bernard and tells him to pretend like they're having a serious conversation, but just to listen and not say a word. Then he leans in and whispers, because if it hears this, we're dead. We hear him say that he solved the code, and that's it. But whatever he says that we don't hear breaks Bernard immediately. It cuts back to him saying it's true. That's why Meadows quit, and that's why I quit. And then Lucas walks off and seems like a different person when we next see him stop by his mom's place for another visit. She asks if he did what he needed to do, and after a short pause, he tells her it turns out it didn't need doing. Bernard is visibly shaken to his core. He looks at the number 18 keychain and we see that it isn't flashing. He walks right past his director of security as if he wasn't there and just zombie shuffles along until Rob stops him to find out what Lucas said. He doesn't answer the question. Instead, he just says, "Hey Rob, still want to be my shadow? Here you go," and gives him the key and the code to the vault. He adds that he was very loyal until he wasn't and just goes about his business, which includes grabbing his suit and gun and heading to the sheriff's department to have a nice sit. In any other situation, Rob would be thrilled to get what he wanted finally. In this one, he decides to ask Lucas what he told Bernard to break his brain, bringing his gun to expedite the answering process. At around the same time, Bernard pulls his and fires off a shot into the ceiling of the sheriff's station, telling everyone to get out. Lucas asks if Rob is the shadow now, and if Bernard gave him the key. He says Bernard made the mistake of thinking everything was okay because it wasn't lighting up. But he was wrong. It's not lighting up because it's over. And eventually, he just walks right up to Rob's gun to say he can't explain further. He adds that he can kill him and his mother if he wants to, because it doesn't matter. He encourages him to go to the vault and see the legacy before it's too late. This would probably be fairly annoying if we didn't have more information than the people Lucas is talking to. I'm not saying you can understand things completely based on what's happened, but knowing the safeguard exists and learning more about it from Silo 17 helps quite a bit. Before we go there, other than Bernard waving his gun around and just sort of generally behaving like a man with nothing to lose, the major conflict in 18 has essentially been sorted out. The one wild card left is Patrick Kennedy, who started to get some of the other people who were in custody riled up before the deputies freed everyone. This started with what I would consider one of the show's less elegant moves, and what I think is an attempt to make that flash of the cleaning screen on the display that happened before the power went out in season 1 mean something. While Kennedy is shouting about it being safe outside, Sandy comes up to say she saw it too, referring to that scene that always felt a little out of place. So by the time everyone is freed from the holding cell, Patrick has a group together who are itching to go outside. They come into the cafeteria looking pretty unstoppable, as everyone who doesn't want to go out catches a beating. For a new twist on an old favorite, instead of spending the episode trying to leave Silo 17 like she has for the entire season, Juliette spends most of it getting ready to leave. It's kind of the same. Things keep coming up to slow her down, and her fears of what might be happening in Silo 18 basically are. And while she's not heartless, she also doesn't have time or the bandwidth to focus on anything else than completing her task. It's also different, or maybe she's just different, and I mean, we know it's the finale and she'll actually make it outside this time. So if nothing else, it feels different. They go back to Solo's apartment for the first time that he's been there in a long time. The finale held on to the bond that was solidified between these two. And while Jules is possessed with the need to leave at this point, she lets him stay behind and spend some time there when he asks. He starts to remember his parents while he's there, and there's quite a bit of quality solo time before he discovers a piece of paper that mentions the safeguard procedure. He goes after Juliette, telling her this might be the only way to save Silo 18. He eventually remembers it was a pipe that came from outside. His parents figured out that they had to cap it because it had enough poison in it to kill the entire silo. They look for it on a map and realize it was on level 14 where his mom used to work. They run over and we see they're outside Judicial, but they hear the explosion in Silo 18 before they go in. Solo tells her she's out of time, and they rush back to get her suit so she can get ready to leave. Before she can do that, she finally sorts out Audrey after watching her tear into Eater again. We found out her real name is Hope, and while there isn't an extra suit to bring her along, Jules defends her, yelling at Audrey, saying none of the things she blames Hope for are her fault. She didn't ask for this, none of them did, but if they need to be angry, they should be angry at the people who built the silo and put them in it. Her point is that all they're trying to do is survive, but they'll never be able to do that if they don't trust the people they're stuck with. You can see this get through, and the fact that we know her father was killed setting off the bomb by the time she gets to the part about the people she's stuck with, her friends, her family, her dad, it gives this all some emotional heft. It's another really good scene, and it feels necessary before she leaves these kids behind. I mean, even Solo is a kid on some level, and they are provisions, happened, I guess, as far as we can tell. But she's right to not lie about knowing whether or not she can come back for them. She really doesn't know what'll happen when she walks out the door. The new suit she found turned out to be damaged, and her shouting set up a slight diversion so that she can't find it or Solo when she goes looking for the backup suit. Her fear kicks in because how many times has something like this happened now? But when she finds him, that sets up another one of those misty-eyed moments when she finds out he was just down in the water testing the suit to make sure it didn't have any leaks. They share one final scene where he says he knows why she told the kids what she did, but come on, really, you're gonna come back, right? After all their unsuccessful attempts, they can finally share a real hug, and she tells him nothing is gonna stop her from trying to come back for them before she leaves. Things are about to collapse back in 18. The Kennedy faction has fashioned a ram to take out the door and would probably succeed in killing everyone if she didn't come over the hill right when she did. I've watched this quite a few times by now, and it hasn't stopped working yet. Everything about it works. The looks on Knox and Shirley's faces, and on everyone's faces for that matter. The way she stops at the top of the hill and looks in that direction, having no idea what's going on inside. She passes Holston and Allison, and it's at that point that you see that it starts to set in for everyone. They're seeing Juliette return, and then she freaking cleans. She holds up a sign telling them it's not safe outside, and that ends that. It's over. It's what the silo needed to bring it back together. And the only person that we see that isn't completely overwhelmed with emotion is Bernard. Yeah, he is motivated to act though. She starts to try to force the door open and doesn't appear to make any progress before it starts to open on its own. When she gets to the bottom of the stairs, she's met by Bernard in his suit and sees he's on his way out. At the same time inside, we watch Sims enter the vault with Camille and his son. The algorithm asks him why he's there. He says he wants to save the silo, and it says that it does too. Then in a move I didn't see coming, he tells him he has to take his son and leave, but Camille can stay. And that's all we really see. I suppose it makes sense if this thing is keeping tabs on what's happening and believes Camille has the silo's best interest at heart. Plus it lines up with what Rob said about people seeing him as the enemy. But it's the kind of development that if you told me at the beginning of the season it was going to happen, I wouldn't have believed you. I don't think we can say exactly what's happening here, but it seems like Camille is Bernard's replacement. The conversation he has with Juliette is tense, and the fact that he still has his gun adds to that. He's there because after he realizes the algorithm can end it all at any time, his life and his devotion to the order stop making sense. He just wants to go outside to feel free one time. It sounds a lot like what Judge Meadows was saying. He tells her that she can't save them, the people in the silo, because it's out of her hand. It's out of all of their hands. And then she tells him she knows about the poison and the safeguard procedure. This information she got from Jimmy really could make all the difference based on the reactions of Meadows, Lucas, and Bernard when they found out the whole game was rigged, to use Salvador Quinn's words. She knows about the safeguard, but she doesn't know the who or the why. He knows the who, but doesn't know why and says he doesn't care. She gets him to lower the gun and starts to explain that she figured something out and might be able to prevent the safeguard from going through, but right at that same time the door starts to close. She jumps in without thinking, not wanting to get locked outside. He tells her that she'll be burned alive because of the cleansing process. They both still end up inside and dive to the ground as the flames consume everything. It doesn't show us their fate, and really Bernard is the only one we really need to wonder about surviving. This should kill anyone inside, but Juliette's suit, being for firefighters, will probably explain how she'll live, because it's Rebecca Ferguson, so of course she'll be back next season. This is all a bit different than how it played out in the books, and I know Bernard's fate there, but I'm honestly not sure if it'll turn out to be the same. He's Tim Robbins, and he delivered a fantastic performance this season, so you might want to keep him around. But I think if he did survive, he would have to be severely burnt while only wearing the cleaning suit. It's fire. Even if her suit gave him some protection, he couldn't come out of there unscathed. My initial thought was that he'd die, but rewatching it, I don't know, it felt like you could see them working together in future seasons. The cliffhanger is not the end though. Instead, we go back in time to a year that could be close to the present day and head into a bar in Washington, D.C. A young congressman named Daniel meets a woman named Helen for what looks like a date. We pick up several interesting details, but the contrast to life in the silo is so striking that it's hard to know what's important. They mention a dirty bomb attack, and as the conversation continues, we learn she's a reporter who wants to know if there are plans to strike back against Iran. This is something he doesn't want to talk about or can't talk about. And while there's a whole thing going on where he pretends he didn't look her up, he definitely did. So on some level, he knew he was coming to meet a reporter either way. He does leave when she tries to steer the conversation in that direction and gives her a gift he says he panic bought on the way out. It's the Duck Pez dispenser that hints that she'll eventually take it with her into Silo 18 so that it can make its way to George years down the road. This is a tease, but as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a promise from the creators that they're going to explain how the silos came to be. If you're unfamiliar with the book series, the second book does that, but it also doesn't really feature Juliette's story because it's a prequel. That's put on hold until the third book. Showrunner Graham Yost has said that they've already worked this out and know how they're going to make it less jarring than doing a straight flashback season, but we'll have to wait until it comes out to see how the government gets involved and what part this Georgia congressman who studied engineering and this reporter, how they fit into the picture. And I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.